I want you to know something right now, before I tell you the rest of this story. I never thought my own son would be capable of what he did. Never. Not in 63 years of living, not in 34 years of being his mother. But that envelope, that single, cream-colored envelope my daughter-in-law pressed into my trembling hands on a Tuesday afternoon in March, that envelope saved my life. And if you're listening to this from your car, your kitchen, your bedroom in the middle of the night because you can't sleep either, I want you to leave a comment telling me where you're from. Because I need to know I'm not alone in this. I need to know that somewhere out there, someone else understands what it feels like when the people you die for become the people you need to survive. The morning it happened, I was standing in my kitchen making blueberry muffins. The same recipe I'd been using since 1987, the one my mother taught me before the cancer took her voice, then her breath, then everything else. I can still smell those muffins when I close my eyes, the butter browning in the oven, the sugar crystallizing on top, that particular sweetness that only comes from fruit that's been frozen and thawed and somehow tastes more like summer than fresh berries ever could. I was humming. I remember that detail because it haunts me now. I was actually humming some old Fleetwood Mac song, completely unaware that in less than 3 hours, my entire understanding of my life would shatter like dropped china. My daughter-in-law, Rebecca, she's the one who gave me the envelope, had called that morning and asked if she could stop by. Just her, not my son Timothy. She said she wanted to drop off some pictures from Easter, some photos of my grandbabies that she'd finally gotten printed. Rebecca had always been thoughtful like that, old-fashioned in ways that reminded me of myself at her age. She printed photos. She wrote thank you notes by hand. She remembered birthdays without Facebook reminders. When Timothy brought her home for the first time 8 years ago, I'd looked at her across my dining room table and thought, this one's a keeper. I should have known something was wrong the moment she walked through my front door. Her face was pale, drained of the usual warmth that made her green eyes sparkle when she smiled. She wasn't smiling that day. She was wearing a navy blue cardigan I'd given her for Christmas 2 years before, and she was clutching her purse against her chest like it contained something alive and dangerous. But I was so caught up in my own world, so comfortable in my delusion of a happy family, that I just pulled her into a hug and told her the muffins would be ready in 10 minutes. Eleanor, she said quietly, and the way she said my name made my stomach drop. Not Mom, which is what she'd called me since the wedding. Just Eleanor. Formal. Distant. Terrified. What's wrong, honey? I'd asked, pulling back to look at her face. Are the kids okay? Is Timothy? The kids are fine, she interrupted, but her voice cracked on the word fine. Can we sit down? We sat at my kitchen table, the same oak table where I'd served thousands of meals, where Timothy had done his homework every night of his childhood, where my late husband David and I had shared coffee every morning for 29 years before his heart gave out in 2019. The table felt different that day. Heavy. Like it knew what was coming before I did. Rebecca set her purse on the table and stared at it for a long moment. Her hands were shaking. I reached across and covered them with mine, these old, spotted hands that have held babies and buried a husband and made more muffins than I could ever count. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together, I told her, because that's what mothers do. We fix things. We make it better. She looked up at me then, and I saw tears gathering in her eyes like a storm about to break. I need you to do something for me, she whispered. And I need you to trust me completely, even though what I'm about to ask is going to sound insane. Before I could respond, she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. It was thick, letter-sized, sealed. No writing on the outside. Just blank, cream-colored paper that looked expensive, the kind you use for wedding invitations or sympathy cards. She held it in both hands, staring at it like it might explode, and then she slid it across the table toward me. Don't open this here, she said, her voice barely audible. Go home. Pack a bag. I looked at her, confused, my brain struggling to make sense of words that felt disconnected from reality. Rebecca, I am home. What are you? You have 2 days, she interrupted, and now the tears were spilling down her cheeks, leaving dark tracks through her makeup. 2 days before. Just trust me, Eleanor. Please. Go somewhere. Anywhere. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Not your sister, not your friends, not me. Especially not Timothy. The mention of my son's name sent ice through my veins. What does Timothy have to do with this? Rebecca, you're scaring me. She stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. I have to go. I've already been here too long. Just Read what's in the envelope when you're alone. Really alone. Lock your doors. And then do exactly what I said. Pack a bag. Leave. You have 2 days. 2 days until what? I demanded, standing up too, my voice rising with panic I didn't fully understand yet. Rebecca, talk to me. What's going on? But she was already walking toward the door, moving fast, like she was being chased by something I couldn't see. She paused at the threshold and turned back to look at me one last time. I'm so sorry, she said, and the way she said it, the absolute devastation in those 3 words, made my blood run cold. I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner. I should have. God, Eleanor, I'm sorry. And then she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her, and I heard her car start in my driveway, heard the tires squeal slightly as she pulled away too fast. I stood there in my entryway, still holding that sealed envelope, with the smell of blueberry muffins filling my house and absolutely no idea that my life as I knew it had just ended. If you've ever experienced that moment when reality shifts beneath your feet, when something happens that you can't explain but you just know, that nothing will ever be the same, then hit that subscribe button right now, because this story goes places I never could have imagined. And check the description box below for more stories like this, because I promise you, the truth is always stranger and more devastating than fiction. I walked back to the kitchen table and sat down slowly, staring at that envelope like it was a snake coiled and ready to strike. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected, stuffed full of something. Papers, maybe. Or photographs. The seal was tight, professionally done, not just licked and pressed closed. Someone had taken time with this. Someone had planned this. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to tear it open right then and there, to end the suspense and find out what the hell was happening. But Rebecca's voice kept echoing in my mind, don't open this here. Go home. Pack a bag. You have 2 days. 2 days. 2 days until what? I looked around my kitchen, at the muffins cooling on the counter, at the African violet on the windowsill that I'd kept alive for 6 years, at the refrigerator covered in my grandchildren's artwork held up by magnets from places David and I had traveled before his heart gave out. This was my home. The only home I'd known since 1989. The place where I'd raised my son, buried my husband, survived my grief. The place where I felt safe. But suddenly, sitting there with that envelope in my hands, I didn't feel safe anymore. I felt watched. Hunted. Like there was something terrible lurking just outside my field of vision, waiting for the right moment to strike. I stood up on legs that felt like water and walked to the front door. I locked it. Then I went around to every other door and window in the house, checking locks, pulling curtains closed, making sure I was truly alone. The house felt different now. Smaller. Like the walls were closing in. Or maybe like they weren't walls at all anymore. Maybe they were just stage props that could be pushed over at any moment to reveal the truth behind the performance. I went to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed that David and I had shared for almost 3 decades. My fingers found the edge of the envelope seal. I hesitated, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my temples, behind my eyes. What if I don't open it? I thought. What if I just throw it away and pretend this never happened? What if I call Timothy right now and ask him what's going on? Let him explain, let him make this make sense. But I knew I couldn't do that. Because Rebecca had said, especially not Timothy. I tore open the envelope. Inside were photographs. At least 2 dozen of them, printed on regular copy paper, clearly printed at home from someone's computer. The quality wasn't great, some were grainy, others were too dark or taken from strange angles, but they were clear enough. Clear enough to see what they showed. Clear enough to destroy me. The first photograph showed my house. My house. But the angle was wrong. It was taken from across the street, slightly elevated, like someone was sitting in a car or standing on a neighbor's porch. There was a date and timestamp in the corner. March 3rd, 2 weeks ago, 7:43 p.m. I remembered that night. I'd made pot roast. I'd watched Jeopardy. I'd gone to bed at 10:30 like I always did. The second photograph showed my car in the grocery store parking lot. Date stamp, March 7th, 9:15 a.m. My usual shopping day, my usual time. The third showed me walking out of my doctor's office. March 10th, 2:30 p.m. My regular checkup, the one where Dr. Patterson told me my blood pressure was good, my cholesterol was manageable, and I should keep doing whatever I was doing because I was healthy as a horse. Someone had been following me. photographing me, documenting my movements, my routines, my life. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the stack of photos. But I forced myself to keep looking because I needed to understand. I needed to know who was doing this and why. The fourth photograph made me gasp out loud. It showed the inside of my house. My living room, specifically, taken through the front window. I could see my couch, my television, the lamp I always left on in the evening. And I could see myself, sitting in my favorite chair, reading a book. The curtains had been open that night. I remembered because I'd been enjoying the sunset. Someone had been standing in my front yard, close enough to photograph me through my window, and I'd had no idea. The next several photos were similar. My house from different angles, my car at different locations, me walking in and out of buildings I visited regularly. My church. The library. The coffee shop where I met my friend Patricia every Thursday morning. Whoever was doing this had been watching me for weeks, maybe longer, mapping out my entire existence. And then I got to the photograph that changed everything. The one that made me understand why Rebecca had looked so terrified, why she told me to run. It was a screenshot of a text message conversation. The names at the top were blocked out, but I could read the messages clearly. When? Soon. Couple weeks. Maybe. Waiting for the right opportunity. You sure about this? It's the only way. She's not going to just give it up voluntarily. What about Rebecca? She doesn't need to know. Nobody needs to know. It'll look like an accident. And you're sure it'll work? I've been planning this for months. Trust me. It'll work. My vision started to blur. My chest felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The words on that screen kept echoing in my head. It'll look like an accident. They were planning to kill me. Someone was planning to murder me and make it look like an accident. But who? Who would want me dead? I forced myself to keep looking through the photos, even though every cell in my body was screaming at me to stop, to run, to hide. And that's when I found it, the photograph that answered my question and broke my heart into pieces so small I didn't think they could ever be put back together. It was another screenshot, this time showing a contact name at the top of a text conversation. The name was Timothy. My son. My only child. The boy I'd carried for 9 months, labored for 14 hours to bring into this world, raised with every ounce of love and devotion I had. The man I'd supported through college, through his wedding, through the birth of his own children. The person I would have died for without a moment's hesitation. Timothy was planning to kill me. I don't know how long I sat there on my bed, staring at those photographs, trying to make my brain accept what my eyes were seeing. Time felt broken, like someone had taken a hammer to the clock and now seconds lasted hours and hours passed in the space of a heartbeat. The afternoon sun moved across my bedroom floor, the shadows lengthening and stretching, and I just sat there, frozen, while my entire world reconstructed itself around this new, horrible truth. My son wanted me dead. Those 5 words kept repeating in my mind like a prayer or a curse, I couldn't tell which. My son wanted me dead. My son wanted me dead. How does a mother process that? How do you take 34 years of love and sacrifice and late-night fevers and birthday parties and bedtime stories and first days of school and recitals and graduations and weddings? How do you take all of that and square it with the fact that the person you created, the person you would take a bullet for, is the one holding the gun? I made myself keep looking through the rest of the envelope because I needed to understand. There had to be a reason. People don't just decide to murder their mothers for no reason, right? There had to be something I was missing, some explanation that would make this make sense, even if it didn't make it right. At the bottom of the stack, I found a printed document. It looked like it had been photographed from an angle, taken quickly, maybe while someone was looking over a shoulder or peeking through a doorway. The heading at the top read, Last Will and Testament of Eleanor Patricia Hoffman. My will. Someone had photographed my will. I'd updated it 2 years ago, after David died, working with an attorney in town to make sure everything was in order. It was straightforward, nothing complicated. My house, my savings, my life insurance policy, everything went to Timothy. He was my only child, my only heir. Who else would I leave it to? But scrawled in the margins of this photographed copy were handwritten notes in a script I didn't recognize. Dollar amounts. Calculations. The house was listed at $340,000, which was roughly what it would sell for in the current market. My savings account, $127,000. David's life insurance, which I'd never touched, $250,000. My own life insurance policy, $500,000. Someone had added it all up. The total, circled in red ink at the bottom of the page, $1,217,000. $1.2 million. That's what my life was worth. That's why my son, my baby boy, the child I'd rocked to sleep every night until he was 4 years old because he was afraid of the dark, wanted me dead. I thought I might vomit. My stomach was churning, and there was a taste in my mouth like copper, like blood. I stumbled to the bathroom and gripped the sides of the sink, staring at my face in the mirror. I looked old. When had I gotten so old? When had these lines around my eyes gotten so deep, these spots on my hands so pronounced? When had my hair turned from brown to grey to this silvery white that I'd convinced myself looked distinguished but really just looked ancient? Maybe Timothy saw me the way I was seeing myself now. Used up, worn out, taking up space that could be better used by someone younger, someone with more time left. Maybe he looked at me and saw nothing but a pile of money waiting to be liquidated, an inheritance waiting to be claimed. The thought made me so angry I had to grip the sink harder to keep from screaming. I wanted to call him right then and there. I wanted to dial his number and listen to it ring, and when he answered, I wanted to say, I know what you're planning. How could you? How could you? But Rebecca's voice in my head stopped me. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Especially not Timothy. Rebecca knew. Somehow, she'd found out what her husband was planning, and instead of staying silent, instead of protecting him, she'd warned me. She'd risked everything, her marriage, her family, her children's father, to save my life. That took a kind of courage I wasn't sure I possessed. It took a kind of love that transcended blood relation. My daughter-in-law, who'd only known me for 8 years, cared more about my life than my own son did. I went back to the bedroom and looked at the photographs again, forcing myself to really study them, to think like someone who was planning a murder instead of someone who was trying to survive one. The images of my daily routines weren't random. They showed patterns. They showed predictability. They showed vulnerability. Every Tuesday afternoon, I went to the library. Same time, same route. I walked there because it was only 6 blocks and the exercise was good for me. The path took me past an intersection where cars regularly ran the red light, where there'd already been 2 fatal accidents in the past 3 years. It would be easy, I realized with growing horror. Someone could wait until I was crossing, accelerate at just the right moment, and everyone would think it was just another tragic accident. Another careless driver. Another elderly pedestrian who didn't move fast enough. Or Thursday mornings at the coffee shop with Patricia. I always ordered the same thing, decaf latte, blueberry scone, and I always sat at the same table by the window. Someone could tamper with my drink. Slip something into it. I'd read enough mystery novels to know how many poisons are nearly undetectable, how many ways there are to make a heart attack look natural, especially in a woman my age with my medical history. Or, and this thought made my breath catch, my own house. The photos showed someone had been close enough to photograph me through my windows. What if they had a key? What if they'd already been inside, already staged whatever accident they were planning? A gas leak that could cause an explosion. Loosened railings on the stairs. Medications switched in their bottles. I started going through every room in my house, looking for signs that someone had been there, that something had been tampered with. The stairs were solid. The gas stove worked normally. My medications looked undisturbed. But that didn't mean anything. Just because I couldn't see the trap didn't mean it wasn't there, waiting to spring closed around me. By the time darkness fell, I'd worked myself into a state of paranoia that would have seemed comical if it weren't so absolutely justified. Every sound made me jump. Every car that drove down my street made me peek through the curtains. Every shadow looked like it might contain my son, waiting for the right moment to strike. I tried to think about when things had changed with Timothy. When had I stopped being his mother and started being an obstacle? We'd always been close, or so I thought. After David died, Timothy had been supportive, helpful, present. He'd called every day for the first month. He'd helped me figure out the life insurance paperwork, the estate stuff, all the complicated business that comes with death. He'd been the one who suggested I update my will, who'd recommended the attorney I'd used. Oh God. He'd recommended the attorney. Had that been part of the plan? Had he been setting this up for 2 years? I thought back to the months after David's funeral, trying to remember details, trying to spot signs I'd missed. Timothy had been interested in my finances, I realized now. He'd asked questions about the life insurance payout, about the house value, about my savings. At the time, I'd thought he was just trying to make sure I was okay, that I had enough to live on, that I wasn't going to struggle. But maybe he'd been doing math in his head. Maybe he'd been calculating his future inheritance and thinking about how long he'd have to wait for it. 2 years. He'd been planning this for at least 2 years, according to those text messages. 2 years of looking at me across the dinner table, of bringing his children to visit their grandmother, of hugging me goodbye and saying I love you, Mom, all while planning my murder. How do you fake that? How do you look someone in the eye and say you love them when you're plotting to kill them? But then I thought about the money again. $1.2 million. That kind of money changes lives. That kind of money solves problems. That kind of money makes people do things they never thought they were capable of. I knew Timothy had been struggling financially. He'd mentioned it in passing: mortgage payments, student loans from law school that still hadn't been paid off, the cost of raising 2 kids in an expensive city. Rebecca had stopped working when their second child was born because daycare was too expensive. They'd had to sell one of their cars last year. They'd cancelled a vacation they'd been planning. But I'd never imagined that he saw me as the solution to his money problems. That he looked at me and saw a bank account that just needed to be liquidated. The worst part was that I would have helped him. If he'd just asked, if he'd just told me he was struggling, I would have given him money. Not all of it, maybe, but enough. Enough to make a difference. Enough to ease the pressure. But that's not what he wanted. He wanted it all. And he wanted it now. And the only way to get it was to make sure I didn't live long enough to spend it myself. I realized I was crying. Hot tears running down my face, dripping off my chin, soaking into the collar of my shirt. I was crying for the son I thought I knew, for the man I thought I'd raised, for the relationship I thought we had. I was crying for the loss of innocence, the death of trust, the end of the life I'd built and believed in. But underneath the grief was something else. Something harder and colder and more dangerous. Anger. Pure, white-hot rage that burned away the tears and left something sharp and clear in its place. My son wanted to kill me for my money. My son, who I'd given everything to, who I'd sacrificed for, who I'd loved unconditionally for 34 years, wanted to murder me for $1.2 million. Well, he was going to have to try a lot harder than he thought. Because I wasn't going to die. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. And before this was over, before I decided what to do with the rest of my life, I was going to make damn sure he understood exactly what he'd thrown away. I looked at those photographs one more time, memorizing every detail. Then I gathered them all up, put them back in the envelope, and hid them in a place nobody would think to look. Then I went to my closet and pulled out the suitcase I hadn't used since David died, and I started packing. Rebecca had said I had 2 days. I didn't know 2 days until what, exactly, but I wasn't going to wait around to find out. I packed practical clothes, comfortable shoes, my medications, my important documents, birth certificate, social security card, passport. I packed the jewelry David had given me over the years, not because it was valuable but because it was mine and I'd be damned if Timothy was going to inherit it and probably sell it to pay off his mortgage. I packed photographs of my parents, of David, of Timothy as a baby before he grew into a monster. And then I did something that surprised even me. I went to the lockbox in my closet where I kept emergency cash, just a few $100s in small bills, the kind of thing you keep around in case of power outages or emergencies. But underneath that cash was something else. Something I hadn't looked at in years. David's gun. He'd bought it when we first moved to this neighborhood in 1989, back when this area was rougher, before it became the safe, expensive suburb it is now. He'd taught me how to use it, how to load it, how to clean it. We'd gone to the shooting range together a handful of times until it became clear I was actually a pretty decent shot. Then he'd locked it up and as far as I knew, he'd never touched it again. I took it out now. The metal was cold and heavy in my hands. The weight of it felt significant, like I was holding something more than just a weapon. I was holding a choice. A decision. A line I might have to cross. I packed it in the bottom of my suitcase, underneath my clothes where no one would see it. Then I sat down and waited for morning, because I needed daylight to do what I was about to do next. I needed to see clearly, to think clearly, to make sure I wasn't making a mistake. But deep down, I already knew I wasn't making a mistake. Deep down, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. My son wanted to play games with my life. Fine. Game on. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Timothy's face, not as the grown man he was now, but as the little boy he'd been. 3 years old, crying because he'd scraped his knee on the sidewalk. 7 years old, beaming with pride after hitting his first home run in Little League. 12 years old, devastated after his first heartbreak, sobbing into my shoulder while I stroked his hair and promised him it would get better. 16 years old, nervous before his driving test, gripping my hand and saying, "Mom, what if I fail?" And me telling him he wouldn't, that he could do anything he set his mind to, that I believed in him. I'd believed in him then. I'd believed in him for 34 years. And now I didn't know what to believe anymore. When the sun finally started rising, painting my bedroom walls in shades of pink and gold, I felt hollowed out. Empty. Like someone had scooped out everything that made me who I was and left just the shell behind. But shells can be useful. Shells can be armor. And I was going to need all the armor I could get. I made coffee, strong, black, the way David used to drink it when he was working late nights at the firm. The normalcy of the routine was comforting and horrifying at the same time. Here I was, making coffee like it was any other Wednesday morning, when in reality, my entire life had been revealed as a lie and I was preparing to what? Run away? Fight back? I didn't even know yet. All I knew was that I wasn't going to sit around and wait to be murdered. The envelope was still where I'd hidden it last night. In the very back of my linen closet, tucked inside a pillowcase that hadn't been used in years. I pulled it out and spread the photographs across my kitchen table again, studying them in the morning light, looking for details I might have missed. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In several of the photos taken of my house from across the street, there was a car visible in the frame. A dark sedan, parked in the same spot in multiple pictures taken on different days. The license plate wasn't quite clear enough to read, but the car itself was distinctive. It had a dent in the rear bumper and what looked like a university parking sticker on the back window. Timothy drove a dark sedan. Timothy had gone to State University. Timothy had dented his rear bumper last year backing into a pole at the grocery store, and as far as I knew, he'd never gotten it fixed. My son hadn't even bothered to hide his surveillance. He'd parked right across the street from my house, sat there watching me, photographing me, planning my death, and he'd done it in his own car. Was he arrogant? Careless? Or did he just not think I was smart enough to notice? The anger that had been simmering in my chest since yesterday ignited into something hotter. He thought I was stupid. He thought I was just some old lady who wouldn't see what was happening, who wouldn't question anything, who would just walk into whatever trap he'd set like a lamb to slaughter. Well, he was wrong. I grabbed my phone and pulled up Timothy's contact. My finger hovered over the call button. What would I say if he answered? What excuse could I give for calling at 7 in the morning? I needed to act normal. I needed him to think nothing had changed, that I didn't know anything. That was the only advantage I had right now. He didn't know that I knew. I took a breath and pressed call. It rang 4 times before he picked up, his voice thick with sleep. Mom? Is everything okay? Everything's fine, honey, I said, and I was surprised by how normal I sounded. How steady. How much like the mother I'd been yesterday morning before my world ended. I'm sorry to call so early. I had a thought and I didn't want to forget. What thought? He yawned, and I heard rustling in the background. He was probably still in bed, lying next to Rebecca, who'd risked everything to save me. I was thinking about taking a little trip, I said, the lie forming easily because it wasn't entirely a lie. Maybe going to visit Aunt Rosemary in Florida for a few days. I haven't seen her since David's funeral, and with spring here, I thought it might be nice to get away, see the ocean. There was a pause. A beat too long. That sounds great, Mom. When were you thinking of going? Oh, I don't know. Soon. Maybe. This week, possibly. I kept my voice light, casual, like this was just a random thought and not a test to see how he'd react. I just wanted to let you know in case you tried to reach me and I wasn't home. You should definitely go, Timothy said, and was it my imagination or did he sound eager? You deserve a vacation. You've been cooped up in that house too much since Dad died. The change of scenery would be good for you. The change of scenery would be good for him, I thought bitterly. How convenient if I left town right before whatever he had planned. How perfect if I was somewhere far away where he could arrange an accident and have time to establish his alibi. I'll let you know when I decide for sure, I said. Go back to sleep, honey. I'll talk to you later. Okay, Mom. Love you. Love you too, I said automatically, and the words tasted like ash in my mouth. I hung up before he could hear my voice break. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my phone, processing what I'd just heard. He'd sounded pleased. Enthusiastic, even. The idea of me leaving town, being somewhere else, somewhere vulnerable and away from my normal routine, that made him happy. Which meant whatever he had planned, it was happening soon. And it probably involved me being somewhere other than my house, somewhere public, somewhere where witnesses would see an accident and never question it. I needed to know more. I needed to understand the full scope of his plan, needed to know who else was involved, needed to find out if there was any way to stop this without destroying my family completely. The thought made me laugh, a bitter, hollow sound in my empty kitchen. My family was already destroyed. It had been destroyed the moment Timothy decided my life was worth less than my bank account. I just hadn't known it yet. I spent the next 2 hours going through everything I could find that might give me answers. I looked through old text messages between Timothy and me, searching for clues I'd missed. Most of them were mundane. Dinner Sunday. The kids are excited to see you. Thanks for the birthday check, Mom. You didn't have to do that. But some of them, read through the lens of what I now knew, took on a sinister quality. How are you feeling, Mom? Any health issues I should know about? You taking your medications regularly? Have you thought about updating your insurance policies? He'd been gathering information, making sure he knew my routines, my health status, my vulnerabilities, building a profile of his target. Jesus Christ, that's what I was to him. A target. I searched my house for other signs that someone had been inside without my knowledge. I checked for duplicate keys that might have been made. I looked for tiny cameras or recording devices. I'd seen enough true crime shows to know what to look for. I didn't find anything, but that didn't mean much. Technology was sophisticated these days. Cameras could be the size of pencil erasers. Tracking devices could fit inside coat buttons. Was I being paranoid? Maybe. But was it really paranoia if someone was actually trying to kill you? By mid-morning, I'd made a decision. I needed to talk to Rebecca. She was the only one who could tell me the full truth, who could fill in the gaps, who could explain how she'd found out and what exactly Timothy was planning. But I couldn't just call her. What if Timothy was monitoring her phone? What if he suspected she knew something? I needed to be smart about this. Strategic. I needed to think like someone who was fighting for her life, because that's exactly what I was doing. I got dressed, jeans, a sweater, comfortable shoes, and I put the envelope of photographs in my purse. Then I drove to the grocery store, the one I always went to on Wednesdays, at the time I always went. I needed to maintain my normal routine, at least on the surface. I needed Timothy to think everything was proceeding according to his plan. But once I got to the store, I didn't shop. Instead, I went straight to the customer service desk and asked to use their phone. The young woman working there looked confused but handed it over. I dialed Rebecca's cell phone number. I had it memorized from all the times I'd called to coordinate visits with the grandkids. She answered on the second ring. Hello. Rebecca, it's Eleanor. Don't say my name. Just listen. Can you talk? I'm at the store, she said carefully. Shopping for dinner. Good. Stay there. I'm at Morrison's on 5th Street. I need you to come here, but make sure you're not followed. Park on the opposite side of the building from where you usually park, and come in through the pharmacy entrance. We need to talk. There was a pause. I could hear children's voices in the background, my grandchildren, probably fighting over something inconsequential, blissfully unaware that their father was planning to murder their grandmother. I can be there in 20 minutes, Rebecca said quietly. 20 minutes, I confirmed, and hung up. I handed the phone back to the confused customer service representative, thanked her, and then positioned myself near the pharmacy entrance where I could see everyone coming and going. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might have a heart attack right there in the grocery store, which would be ironic, dying of natural causes before my son could arrange my accident. Rebecca arrived in exactly 18 minutes. I watched her park on the far side of the lot, watched her glance around nervously before getting out of her car, watched her hurry toward the entrance with her head down like she was trying to be invisible. When she stepped through the automatic doors, I caught her eye and gestured toward the small cafe area at the front of the store. It was mostly empty at this time of day, just a few elderly people drinking coffee and reading newspapers. We sat at a corner table, as far from other people as possible. Rebecca's hands were shaking as she folded them on the table in front of her. She looked like she hadn't slept either. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her skin had a grayish tint that made her look sick. "Are the kids okay?" I asked, because even in the middle of all this, they were still my grandchildren and I needed to know they were safe. "They're at my mother's," Rebecca said. I told her I needed a few hours to run errands. "Timothy's at work. He won't be home until 6. "How long have you known?" I asked, keeping my voice low even though there was no one close enough to hear us. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. 2 weeks. I found files on his computer. He'd been careless, left them open when he went to shower one night. I saw everything. The surveillance photos, the plans, the calculations. She pressed her hand to her mouth like she might be sick. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I should have told you immediately, but I didn't know how, and I was afraid if I confronted him. He might come after you too," I finished for her. She nodded miserably. I kept trying to convince myself I was wrong, that there had to be some other explanation. But then I read the text messages between him and his brother. The world tilted sideways. His brother? Peter? Rebecca nodded. "Peter's involved. He's been helping Timothy plan this. They've been... God, Eleanor, they've been talking about it like it's just business. Like you're just an obstacle to be removed." Peter. My nephew, my late brother's son, the boy I'd helped raise after my brother died in a car accident when Peter was only 15. Peter, who I'd paid for college because his mother couldn't afford it. Peter, who I'd given a loan to when he was starting his business, a loan I'd told him he never had to pay back. Peter, who called me Aunt Ellie and brought his kids to visit and told me I was like a second mother to him. He was in on it too. "What's the plan?" I asked, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. "What exactly are they planning to do?" Rebecca pulled out her phone, glanced around to make sure no one was watching, and opened her photos. She scrolled through several before landing on a screenshot similar to the ones I'd seen in the envelope. But this one was new. This one I hadn't seen yet. It was a text exchange dated 3 days ago. "Timothy, Saturday. Morning. Library route. Peter, you sure about the timing?" "Timothy, it's perfect. Fewer witnesses that early. Street cameras are broken on that block, checked yesterday." "Peter, and you've got the car situation handled?" "Timothy, stolen plates, untraceable vehicle. It'll look like a hit and run. She's old, walks slow, never pays attention. It'll be quick." "Peter, and if she survives?" "Timothy, she won't. But if she does, she's old. Memory issues. Won't be able to ID anyone. And even if she could, there's nothing to trace back to us." Saturday. That was 3 days from now. My usual library day, my usual morning walk. They were going to run me down in the street like an animal and make it look like an accident. I felt something break inside me. Not my heart, that had already broken yesterday when I first saw those photographs. This was something deeper, something fundamental. It was the last thread of hope that maybe this wasn't real, that maybe there was some mistake, that maybe my son was still the person I thought he was. That thread snapped, and what replaced it was cold, clear purpose. "I need to see everything," I told Rebecca. "Every text message, every file, every piece of evidence you found. I need to know exactly what they're planning and who else knows about it." "What are you going to do?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I'm not going to die on Saturday morning. And I'm not going to let them get away with this." Rebecca pulled up more screenshots on her phone, and I took photos of them with my own phone, creating a backup of the evidence in case something happened to her copies. There were dozens of messages between Timothy and Peter, spanning back almost 2 years, just like I'd suspected. They'd been planning this methodically, carefully, discussing every detail like they were planning a vacation instead of a murder. Some of the messages made me physically ill. "Peter, you really think you can go through with it? She's your mother." "Timothy, she's had a good life. She's old. How many more years does she have anyway? 10? 15? Why should we wait that long when we need the money now? Peter, what about guilt? Timothy, guilt doesn't pay my mortgage. Besides, it'll be quick. She won't suffer. How generous of him. He was going to make sure my murder was quick. I was supposed to be grateful, apparently, that he wasn't planning to make me suffer. There were other messages too, ones that revealed just how deep their financial problems went. Timothy owed more than $200,000 in debt between his mortgage, student loans, and credit cards. Peter's business was failing, hemorrhaging money, on the verge of bankruptcy. They saw my death as the solution to all their problems. Split the inheritance 60-40, Timothy getting more since he was the direct heir. They'd already spent my money in their heads, already divided up the spoils, already planned their futures with my death as the foundation. There's more, Rebecca said quietly. She pulled up another file, this one showing a life insurance policy I didn't recognize. Timothy took out a second policy on you 6 months ago. $1 million, in addition to the one you already have. He forged your signature on the application. That was insurance fraud. That was premeditated murder. That was a level of calculation that went beyond desperation into something much darker. He'll get caught, I said. There's no way he can pull this off. The police will investigate. They'll find evidence. Will they? Rebecca asked. It's a hit and run on an elderly woman in a neighborhood with no working cameras. The car will be untraceable. There are no witnesses scheduled to be there at that time, Timothy checked. And he's an attorney, Eleanor. He knows how these investigations work. He knows what evidence to avoid leaving behind. He's been planning this for 2 years. He's thought of everything. She was right. I could see it in the meticulous detail of those text messages, in the careful planning, in the way they'd covered every angle. Timothy was smart. He'd always been smart. It's why he'd done so well in law school, why he'd made partner at his firm by age 35. He knew how to think 10 steps ahead, how to anticipate problems, how to cover his tracks. But he'd made one mistake. One crucial, fatal error in his perfect plan. He'd underestimated Rebecca. He'd assumed his wife would be too afraid or too loyal or too naive to interfere. He'd thought she'd either not notice or not care. He'd been wrong on both counts. And now he was going to pay for that mistake. I need you to do something for me, I told Rebecca. And it's going to be hard, maybe the hardest thing you've ever done. But it's the only way this works. Anything, she said immediately. Tell me what you need. I need you to act normal. I need you to go home, be with your children, pretend nothing has changed. Don't let Timothy suspect you know anything. Can you do that? Rebecca's face went pale, but she nodded. I've been doing it for 2 weeks. I can keep doing it. If he suspects you know, if he thinks you're a threat. I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't have to. I know, she whispered. I've thought about that. But I couldn't just let him kill you. I couldn't live with myself. I reached across the table and took her hand. You saved my life. I won't forget that. And I promise you, whatever happens next, I'm going to make sure you and the children are protected. You're not going to suffer for doing the right thing. What are you going to do? She asked again. This time, I had an answer. It had been forming in the back of my mind since I'd first seen those text messages, solidifying with each new piece of evidence, becoming clearer and more certain with every word I read. It was crazy. It was dangerous. It might not work. But it was the only way. I'm going to die, I said simply. On Saturday morning, on my way to the library, I'm going to be killed in a hit and run. Just like Timothy planned. Just like he wants. Rebecca stared at me like I'd lost my mind. What? Eleanor, no. And then, I continued, I'm going to come back from the dead. And I'm going to make sure my son understands exactly what he's done. Exactly what he's lost. Exactly how much I'm worth, and it's not $1.2 million. For the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who'd been pushed too far, who'd lost too much, who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. It was the smile of someone planning revenge. The next 2 days were the strangest of my life. I moved through my routine like an actress playing the role of Eleanor Hoffman, the oblivious elderly woman who had no idea her son was planning to murder her. I went to the grocery store. I met Patricia for coffee on Thursday morning like I always did, and I sat there listening to her complain about her rheumatoid arthritis while my mind was racing through logistics and contingencies and the 1,000 ways my plan could go wrong. I watered my plants. I did laundry. I made dinner for myself every night and ate it alone at my kitchen table while staring at the empty chair where David used to sit. But underneath the performance, I was preparing, planning, getting ready for what came next. Friday afternoon, I called Patricia and told her I wasn't feeling well, that I might skip our coffee date next Thursday. It's probably nothing, I said, injecting just the right amount of worry into my voice. Maybe a cold coming on. But at my age, you can't be too careful. Patricia, bless her, immediately launched into concern mode. Do you need me to bring you anything? Soup? Medicine? No, I'll be fine. I just wanted to let you know in case I'm not up for going out next week. Well, you take care of yourself, Eleanor. And call me if you need anything at all. I promised I would, knowing I wouldn't. Patricia was a good friend, but she was also a gossip, and by this evening, half the ladies in our book club would know that Eleanor Hoffman wasn't feeling well. Word would spread. People would remember. It was the beginning of a narrative, an old woman, feeling sick, maybe not paying attention, maybe a little unsteady on her feet. It would make the accident more believable. Friday evening, I drove to the library and walked my usual route home, timing myself. 14 minutes door to door, accounting for my slower pace these days and the stop at the intersection where I always waited for the light. The problematic intersection, the one where 2 people had already died, was 3 blocks from the library, at the corner of Maple and 5th. There was a crosswalk there, but the trees overhung the street sign, making it hard to see. Cars came around that corner too fast all the time. It would be the perfect place for a hit and run. I stood on that corner for a long time, watching the traffic, studying the angles, memorizing every detail. There was a narrow alley on the right side of the intersection, barely visible behind an overgrown hedge. A person could hide there, waiting, watching. There was also a coffee shop on the opposite corner with a clear view of the intersection, but according to Timothy's text messages, it didn't open until 9 a.m. on Saturdays. My usual library time was 8:30 a.m., so I'd be crossing this intersection at approximately 8:45, before the coffee shop opened, before there were many witnesses. Timothy really had thought of everything. I walked down the alley, checking to make sure no one was watching. It was narrow and dark, filled with garbage bins and the smell of rot. But at the far end, it connected to another street, a back way out, a escape route. Perfect. By the time I got home Friday evening, I'd mapped out every detail of what needed to happen. I'd identified the risks, the variables, the things I could control and the things I couldn't. I'd made peace with the fact that this could go horribly wrong, that I could actually die tomorrow morning, that this might be the last night I spent in the house David and I had shared for so many years. But I'd also accepted that doing nothing would definitely result in my death, whereas doing something, taking control, turning the tables, at least gave me a fighting chance. And more than that, it gave me the opportunity to show Timothy exactly what he'd thrown away. To make him understand the magnitude of what he'd done. To destroy him the way he'd destroyed me. I spent Friday night writing letters. One to Patricia, explaining everything and apologizing for not telling her the truth. One to my sister Rosemary in Florida, who I hadn't seen in 2 years but who deserved to know what her nephew had become. One to my lawyer, Mr. Chen. No wait, I told myself not to use that name. One to my lawyer, Mr. Patterson, with instructions for my actual will, the real one that Timothy didn't know existed. Because that was the other thing I'd done in the past 2 days. I'd contacted a different attorney, one in the next town over, one Timothy didn't know and couldn't trace. I'd drawn up a new will, cutting Timothy out entirely. Everything now went to Rebecca and the children, with a trust established to make sure Timothy couldn't touch a penny of it even if he divorced Rebecca and sued for custody. I'd also added a clause specifically stating that Timothy was being disinherited due to his attempt on my life, so he couldn't claim undue influence or mental incompetence. If I died tomorrow, really died, not pretend died, Timothy would get nothing. After everything he'd done, all the planning, all the calculation, all the murder, he'd end up with nothing. There was a beautiful symmetry to that. But I wasn't planning to really die. Not yet. Not before I'd made him pay. I also spent time that evening going through Rebecca's screenshots again, making sure I had copies of everything, uploading them to a cloud storage account Timothy didn't know existed. I wanted multiple backups, multiple fail-safes. If something happened to me, if this plan went sideways, I wanted the evidence to survive. I wanted the truth to come out. At midnight, I allowed myself one final moment of weakness. I went to Timothy's childhood bedroom, the one I'd preserved exactly as he'd left it when he moved out for college. His trophies were still on the shelf: baseball, debate team, academic achievement. His posters were still on the walls: bands I'd never heard of, movies I'd never understood. His books were still on the bookshelf: Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, all the stories about heroes and villains and the triumph of good over evil. I sat on his bed, in the room where I'd tucked him in thousands of times, where I'd read him bedtime stories and checked for monsters under the bed and promised him he was safe, always safe, because his mother would never let anything bad happen to him. And I cried. I cried for the little boy who used to be afraid of thunderstorms, who used to crawl into bed between David and me when the lightning got too scary. I cried for the teenager who'd been so nervous about his first date that he'd thrown up before dinner. I cried for the young man who'd stood at David's grave and sobbed into my shoulder and told me he didn't know how to be strong without his father. I cried for all the versions of my son that had existed before greed and desperation turned him into a killer. And then I dried my tears, stood up, and left that room for what might be the last time. Because that little boy didn't exist anymore. That teenager, that young man, they were gone. The person who remained was someone I didn't know and couldn't save. All I could do now was make sure he didn't take me down with him. Saturday morning arrived cold and grey, the sky threatening rain. I woke up at 6 a.m., made coffee, showered, and dressed in the clothes I'd laid out the night before: comfortable jeans, a warm sweater, sneakers with good traction. I also wore a jacket with deep pockets, inside of which I'd placed several crucial items: my phone, Rebecca's phone number written on a piece of paper in case my phone died, $200 in cash, and David's gun. I wasn't planning to use the gun. I wasn't even planning to show it to anyone. But I'd learned over the past few days that planning was only half the battle. Preparation meant being ready for the unexpected. And if things went wrong, if Timothy somehow figured out what I was doing, if this turned into something more dangerous than I'd anticipated, I wanted the option of defending myself. At 7:45 a.m., I called Timothy. He answered on the second ring, sounding wide awake. Probably anxious. Probably going over the plan in his head one more time. "Hey, Mom," he said, and I heard the false cheerfulness in his voice. "You're up early." "I'm heading to the library," I told him. "I wanted to see if you'd heard anything more about that case you were telling me about. The one with the property dispute." There was no case. I'd made it up on the spot. But Timothy, smooth as always, played along. "Oh, yeah, we settled that one last week actually. I meant to tell you." We chatted for exactly 3 minutes, long enough to establish that I was about to leave for the library, that I was following my normal routine, that everything was proceeding exactly as expected. Long enough for him to note the time, to alert Peter, to get into position. When I hung up, my hands were steady. My heart was racing, but my mind was clear. This was it. This was the moment where everything either worked or fell apart. I grabbed my purse, which contained the envelope of evidence Rebecca had given me, and I walked out my front door for what Timothy thought would be the last time. The morning was quiet. The neighborhood was still mostly asleep, just a few early risers out walking dogs or retrieving newspapers from their driveways. I waved to Mr. Henderson 3 houses down, called out a cheerful good morning, to Mrs. Liu across the street. I wanted witnesses. I wanted people to remember seeing me, alive and well and following my normal routine. I walked toward the library, taking the route I always took. My senses felt hyper-aware, every sound amplified, every movement in my peripheral vision a potential threat. Was that car driving too slowly? Was that person watching me from their window? Was Timothy already in position, waiting for me to reach the intersection where he'd planned my death? My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "Good luck. Be safe. Ah. Rebecca." She was watching somehow, monitoring the situation, ready to act if something went wrong. The thought gave me courage. I reached the library in my usual time and went inside, waving to the librarian who knew me by name. "Morning, Eleanor," she called cheerfully. "Looking for anything specific today?" "Just browsing," I said with a smile. "It's such a nice morning for a walk." I spent exactly 15 minutes inside the library, long enough to maintain the routine but not so long that Timothy would get suspicious or lose patience. I selected a book at random, Some mystery novel I'd never actually read, and checked it out. Then I left through the front door and started walking home. The intersection at Maple and 5th was 3 blocks ahead. My death was 3 blocks ahead. Or so Timothy thought. As I walked, I mentally reviewed the plan one more time. Every step. Every contingency. Every possible thing that could go wrong and how I'd respond. I'd been over it 100 times in my head, but I went through it once more anyway. Because I was only going to get one chance at this. One opportunity to turn the tables, to survive, to win. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. 2 blocks from the intersection, I saw it, the dark sedan with the dented bumper, parked on a side street with a clear view of the crosswalk. The car wasn't Timothy's, though. This one had different plates, probably stolen like the text messages had mentioned. But I could see someone in the driver's seat, could make out the basic shape even if I couldn't identify them from this distance. They were waiting. Watching. Getting ready. 1 block away now. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give out before I even reached the intersection. My hands were shaking. My breath was coming in short gasps. But I kept walking. 1 foot in front of the other. Closer. Closer. I reached the intersection. The light was red. I stopped at the crosswalk, waiting like I always did, the obedient citizen who always followed the rules. Behind me, I heard an engine reverend. Loud. Aggressive. Building speed. They were coming. This was it. I glanced back and saw the sedan accelerating, barreling toward the intersection, toward the crosswalk, toward me. The driver's face was visible now. It wasn't Timothy behind the wheel. It was Peter. My nephew. The boy I'd helped raise. The boy I'd paid for college. Coming at me at 50 miles per hour, ready to kill me for money he thought he deserved. The light turned green. I stepped into the crosswalk. And then, at the last possible second, I did something Timothy hadn't planned for. I dove. Not forward, into the path of the car. Not backward, back to safety. Sideways, toward the narrow alley I'd scouted yesterday, toward the escape route, toward survival. I hit the pavement hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me, sending pain shooting through my shoulder and hip. But I was already rolling, already scrambling, already pulling myself into the shadows of the alley while behind me. I heard tires screeching, heard Peter slamming on the brakes too late, heard the sickening thud of the car hitting something. Not me, though. Not me. I'd left something in my place. Something I'd planted in the crosswalk before diving aside. A mannequin, dressed in my spare jacket, with a wig that matched my hair color, positioned to look like a person who'd been struck by a car. From a distance, in the moment of impact, it would look real. And Peter would think he'd succeeded. He'd think I was dead or dying in the street, would drive away thinking the plan had worked perfectly. He wouldn't realize his mistake until it was too late. I scrambled to my feet and ran down the alley, ignoring the pain in my shoulder, ignoring everything except the need to get away, to disappear, to become a ghost. Behind me, I heard car doors opening. Heard voices, Peter's, and someone else's. Timothy. They were both here. Both checking to make sure I was dead. They were about to get the surprise of their lives. I reached the end of the alley and emerged onto the next street over, where a car was waiting with its engine running. Rebecca was behind the wheel, her face white with terror and determination. I threw myself into the passenger seat. Drive, I gasped. Drive now. She didn't hesitate. The car lurched forward, tires squealing as we pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the Saturday morning traffic. In the rearview mirror, I saw Timothy and Peter standing over the mannequin. Saw the moment they realized what it was, saw the panic and confusion on their faces. By then, we were 3 blocks away and accelerating. Eleanor Hoffman had just died in a hit and run on Maple and 5th. And now, from beyond the grave, she was going to make her son pay. If you're still with me, if you're listening to this story from wherever you are in the world, I want you to understand something. What I did wasn't heroic. It wasn't brave. It was desperate. It was the last resort of a woman who'd been backed into a corner by the person she loved most in the world. And if you've ever felt that kind of betrayal, that bone-deep hurt that comes when family turns on you, then you know there's no right way to respond. There's only survival. So comment below if you understand that feeling, and please, check the description box for more stories like this one. Because I promise you, I'm not alone in experiencing this kind of pain. Rebecca drove us to a motel 40 miles outside of town, a place called the Sunset Inn that looked like it hadn't been renovated since 1975. The carpet was stained, the bedspreads were worn thin, and there was a smell of cigarette smoke embedded in the walls despite the no smoking sign on the door. But it was cheap, it was off the highway, and most importantly, it was the kind of place that didn't ask questions if you paid in cash. I checked in under a fake name, Mary Johnson, I told the bored teenager behind the desk, and Rebecca and I locked ourselves in room 14 while the adrenaline slowly drained from my system and left me shaking like a leaf. "Are you hurt?" Rebecca asked, examining my shoulder where I'd hit the pavement. "Just bruised," I said, though it hurt like hell. The whole right side of my body felt like I'd been hit by a car instead of narrowly avoiding one. "I'll be fine." "That was insane," Rebecca said, and she started laughing, a wild, hysterical sound that bordered on crying. "That was the most insane thing I've ever seen. I thought, when I saw that car coming at you, I thought." "I know," I said quietly. "I thought the same thing. But we pulled it off. Phase 1 complete." Phase 1. Rebecca looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. "Eleanor, you just faked your own death. That's not phase 1. That's everything." "No," I said firmly. "That's just the beginning. Now we wait. We watch. We let Timothy think he got away with it. And then, when he's feeling safe, when he thinks he's home free." "What?" Rebecca whispered. "What are you going to do?" I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through the screenshots she'd given me, the evidence of Timothy's plan. "I'm going to destroy him. Not physically, I'm not a killer like he is. But legally, financially, socially, emotionally. I'm going to take everything he thought he was gaining and turn it into the thing that destroys him. And I'm going to make sure he understands exactly what he lost." Rebecca stared at me for a long moment. "You're not just angry," she said slowly. "You're calculating. This isn't just about survival anymore, is it?" "No," I admitted. "It's about revenge. And justice. And making sure my son understands that mothers aren't just obstacles to be removed. We're human beings. We're people who loved him more than life itself. And when you throw that away, when you try to murder the woman who gave you life." I paused, feeling the rage building in my chest again. "There have to be consequences." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Tell me what you need me to do." We spent the next several hours planning. Rebecca would go home, act distraught but not suspicious. When the police inevitably investigated the hit and run, when they found the mannequin instead of a body, there would be questions. Rebecca would play the worried daughter-in-law, confused about what happened, concerned about where I was. She'd suggest that maybe I'd had a mental break, maybe the grief from losing David had finally caught up with me. She'd plant seeds of doubt about my mental state without outright accusing me of staging the whole thing. It was risky. It meant Rebecca had to be an incredible actress, had to look Timothy in the eye knowing what he'd done while pretending to support him, to comfort him, to be his wife. But she was strong. Stronger than I'd given her credit for. "What about you?" she asked. "You can't stay here forever. Where will you go?" "I have a plan," I said. "My sister Rosemary in Florida. Timothy thinks I was considering visiting her anyway. I'll call her, explain everything, ask if I can stay for a few weeks. She'll help me. She never liked Timothy anyway, always said there was something off about him." It hurt to admit that someone else had seen what I'd missed, but pride seemed pretty irrelevant at this point. "And then what? You just hide out in Florida while Timothy thinks you're dead?" "Not just hide out," I corrected. "I'm going to build a case. A real case, with real evidence that can hold up in court. The photos, the text messages, the forged insurance policy, all of it. And when I have everything I need, when I'm sure it's ironclad, I'm going to come back from the dead and destroy him." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "He's going to try to claim the life insurance," she said. "Both policies. That's over $1.5 million. He'll file the claims, probably this week." "I know. Let him. Insurance fraud on top of attempted murder? That just adds to the charges." "But they'll want a body. Or at least proof of death." I smiled grimly. "They'll have witnesses who saw the hit and run. They'll have Peter's testimony, and he's not going to admit the truth because that would implicate him in murder. They'll have the fact that I've disappeared, that no one can find me. It might take some time, but eventually, Timothy will find a way to have me declared dead. And when he does, When he files those insurance claims and collects that money. I paused. That's when I'll rise from the grave. And that's when he'll realize he's destroyed himself. Rebecca's phone buzzed. She looked at it and went pale. It's Timothy. He's asking where I am. I need to go. Be careful, I told her. If he suspects you know anything. I know, she interrupted. I'll be careful. I promise. She stood up, gathering her purse, preparing to leave. But at the door, she turned back to look at me. Eleanor, why are you doing this? Why not just go to the police right now with the evidence? Why wait? It was a fair question. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to hand everything over to the authorities immediately and let them handle it. But I couldn't do that. I needed more than just Timothy being arrested and tried and sent to prison. I needed him to feel what I'd felt. I needed him to experience the betrayal, the shock, the devastating realization that someone he loved was capable of destroying him. Because prison isn't enough, I said quietly. I want him to think he got away with it. I want him to feel relief, maybe even happiness. I want him to collect that insurance money, to pay off his debts, to think he's finally solved all his problems. And then I want to take it all away. I want him to understand that every good thing he thought he'd gained from my death was actually poison. I want to ruin him the way he tried to ruin me. That's... Rebecca searched for the word. That's cold. Yes, I agreed. It is. But he tried to kill his own mother for money. He deserves cold. Rebecca left, and I was alone in that dingy motel room with nothing but my thoughts and my rage and my carefully constructed plan for revenge. The first thing I did was call Rosemary. My sister was 70 years old, sharp as a tack, and utterly unsurprised when I told her what Timothy had done. I told you there was something wrong with that boy, she said. Even when he was little. Remember when he was 7 and he convinced that neighbor kid to steal for him? And he was always so good at lying, so good at making people believe whatever he wanted them to believe. Why didn't you say something? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Would you have listened? You were his mother. You loved him. You saw what you wanted to see. She was right. I dismissed every red flag, every warning sign, every moment when Timothy had shown me exactly who he was. I'd convinced myself it was just childhood behavior, just teenage rebellion, just adult stress. I'd made excuses for him at every turn. Well, I wasn't making excuses anymore. Rosemary agreed to let me stay with her as long as I needed. She also agreed to help me document everything, to serve as a witness, to support me when the time came to reveal the truth. You're going to need a good lawyer, she said. A really good one. Because when you come back from the dead, Timothy's going to fight dirty. I know, I said. I'm counting on it. The next few days were strange. Surreal. I watched the news on the small TV in the motel room, waiting for reports of the hit and run, but there was nothing. Of course there wasn't. There was no body, no actual victim, just a mannequin that Timothy and Peter had presumably disposed of before anyone else discovered it. They'd probably panicked when they realized what it was, probably driven away as fast as they could, taking the evidence with them. Which meant their accident never got reported. Which meant, officially, Eleanor Hoffman hadn't died, she'd simply disappeared. That was actually better for my plan. It meant Timothy would have to work harder to have me declared dead, would have to maintain the lie for longer, would have to dig himself deeper into the fraud before I could spring the trap. On the third day after my death, Rebecca called me from a burner phone we'd arranged. She was crying. He filed a missing persons report, she said between sobs. He went to the police yesterday, told them you'd been talking about being depressed, about missing David, about maybe not wanting to be here anymore. He suggested that you might have hurt yourself. The audacity of it took my breath away. Not only had Timothy tried to kill me, but now he was setting up a narrative where my disappearance was suicide. Where I was so mentally unstable, so grief-stricken, that I'd taken my own life. It was brilliant, in a sick way. It explained my disappearance. It eliminated the need for a body. And it painted him as the concerned son who'd tried to help his troubled mother but just couldn't save her. What did the police say? I asked. They're investigating. They came to the house, asked me questions about your mental state, whether you'd said anything concerning recently. She paused, and I could hear the guilt in her voice. I backed up his story, Eleanor. I told them you'd seemed sad lately, distant. I hated every word, but I had to make it believable. You did the right thing, I assured her. You're protecting yourself and the kids. And you're helping me build the case against him. He's also contacted the insurance companies, Rebecca continued. Both of them. He told them about the missing persons report, started the process of filing claims. They told him it could take months, maybe a year or more, before they'd pay out without a body. But he's already talking to lawyers about having you declared legally dead. How's he acting? I asked. At home, when it's just you and him. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. He's relieved, she finally said, and her voice was thick with disgust. He's trying to hide it, trying to act concerned and worried, but I can see it in his eyes. He thinks he got away with it. He thinks he's free. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't just wait around for Timothy to complete his fraud. I needed to take action, to start building my case properly, to ensure that when I finally revealed myself, I'd have everything I needed to destroy him completely. I called a private investigator I found online, a woman named Judith Martinez. Wait, no, I'd said not to use that name. A woman named Judith Walsh, who specialized in domestic cases and had a reputation for discretion. I met her at a diner halfway between the motel and the city, and I told her everything. Showed her all the evidence Rebecca had gathered. Explained what Timothy and Peter had done. I need you to document everything, I told her. Every move Timothy makes, every conversation, every transaction. I need proof that he's trying to cash in on my death. And I need it all to be admissible in court. Judith was a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She studied the evidence for a long time before looking up at me. This is attempted murder, she said flatly. You should go to the police. I will, I promised. But not yet. I need Timothy to incriminate himself fully. I need him to file those insurance claims, to collect that money, to spend it. Because then it's not just attempted murder, it's insurance fraud, it's theft, it's a dozen other charges that will put him away for decades. And if he tries again? Judith asked. If he realizes you're still alive and comes after you? He won't, I said with more confidence than I felt. As far as he knows, I'm either dead or I've disappeared so completely that I'll never be found. He has no reason to suspect I'm planning anything. Judith agreed to take the case, though she made me sign about 50 different forms acknowledging the risks, the ethical gray areas, the fact that what I was doing wasn't exactly legal even if Timothy's actions were far worse. I didn't care. Legal didn't matter anymore. Justice mattered. Revenge mattered. Making Timothy pay mattered. Over the next 3 weeks, I lived like a ghost. I stayed with Rosemary in Florida, rarely leaving her house, always looking over my shoulder when I did. I let my hair grow out, stopped coloring the gray, wore sunglasses and hats whenever I went out. I looked different enough that even people who'd known me for years would have to look twice to recognize me. And I watched. Through Judith, through Rebecca, through my own obsessive monitoring of every digital footprint I could find, I watched Timothy's life unfold without me in it. He held a memorial service for me. That was the detail that nearly broke me. Rebecca sent me photos, my son standing at a podium in our church, tears streaming down his face, talking about what a wonderful mother I'd been, how much he missed me, how he'd give anything to have me back. The church was full. Patricia was there, crying into a tissue. My neighbors were there. People I'd known for decades, all gathered to mourn me while my murderer gave the eulogy. Timothy had even put together a slideshow of photos from my life. Me as a young woman, holding baby Timothy in the hospital. Me and David on our wedding day. Me at Timothy's college graduation, so proud I was beaming. The photos told the story of a loving family, a devoted mother, a woman who'd lived a good life and would be missed. It was all a lie. Every word, every tear, every carefully chosen photograph. It was a performance, and Timothy was the star, playing the role of the grieving son while secretly celebrating the fact that he'd gotten away with murder. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burst into that church and expose him in front of everyone. But I forced myself to wait. To be patient. To let him dig the hole deeper. 6 weeks after my disappearance, Timothy filed a petition to have me declared legally dead. He cited the missing persons report, the lack of any contact or sighting, the concerning statements I'd allegedly made about not wanting to live anymore. He had Rebecca's testimony, she'd had no choice but to continue supporting his story. He had statements from Patricia and other friends saying I'd seemed depressed. He had a forensic psychologist who'd never met me but was willing to testify based on second-hand information that I'd been at high risk for suicide. The judge granted the petition. Not immediately. There was a waiting period, investigations, procedures that had to be followed. But the wheels were in motion. In a matter of months, Eleanor Hoffman would be officially, legally dead. And Timothy would be able to claim the insurance money. Judith's reports confirmed what Rebecca had told me. Timothy was already spending money he didn't have yet, running up credit cards in anticipation of the payout. He'd put a deposit down on a new house, a bigger one in a better neighborhood. He'd bought a new car. He'd taken Rebecca and the kids on a vacation to Disney World, using my death as an excuse to celebrate. Peter was doing the same thing. He'd made a large payment on his business debts, told his creditors that a family inheritance was coming through soon. He'd started talking about expansion, about hiring new employees, about finally making his business profitable. They were both counting on my death to solve all their problems. They were both building their futures on my grave. And neither of them knew that grave was empty. 3 months after my disappearance, the insurance companies finally agreed to pay out. There had been some resistance, there always is when there's no body, but Timothy's lawyers had been persuasive. The missing persons report, the mental health concerns, the testimony from family and friends, the judge's declaration of death. It all added up to a convincing case. The checks were issued. $1,500,000, split between the two policies. Minus taxes and fees, Timothy netted about $1.1 million. He deposited the money within hours of receiving the checks. And that's when I knew it was time. I called Rebecca on the burner phone. "Are you ready?" I asked. "I've been ready since the day he tried to kill you," she said. "Tell me what to do." "Tomorrow morning, I need you to take the kids and go to your mother's house. Tell Timothy you're going for a visit, that you'll be back in a few days. And then I need you to stay there, no matter what happens. Don't come home until I tell you it's safe." "Eleanor, what are you going to do?" I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "I'm going to come back from the dead. And I'm going to make sure my son understands exactly what he's done." The next day, I drove back to my hometown for the first time in 3 months. I'd arranged everything carefully, coordinated with Judith and her contacts in law enforcement, made sure every detail was perfect. This had to work. If it didn't, if Timothy somehow wriggled out of this, I'd never get another chance. I parked across the street from my house, the house that legally belonged to Timothy now, since I was dead and he was my heir. I could see lights on inside. I could see Timothy's car in the driveway, the new one he'd bought with my death money. I took a deep breath, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. I looked different than I had 3 months ago. Older, harder, like I'd aged years in just weeks. But I was still recognizably me. Still Eleanor Hoffman, the woman Timothy thought he'd killed. I got out of the car and walked up to my front door. My hand was steady as I reached for the doorbell. And then I rang it. From inside, I heard footsteps approaching. Heard the lock turning. Watched the door swing open. Timothy stood there in sweatpants and a t-shirt, holding a beer, looking relaxed and content and completely unprepared for what he was about to see. His eyes met mine. For a moment, there was no recognition, just confusion at the sight of a stranger on his doorstep. And then he realized who I was. The beer bottle slipped from his hand and shattered on the tile floor. His face went white. His mouth opened but no sound came out. "Hello, Timothy," I said calmly. "We need to talk." For the first time in 3 months, I watched my son's carefully constructed world begin to crumble. And it felt like justice. The look on Timothy's face, I will remember it until the day I actually die. It was pure, absolute terror. Not surprise. Not confusion. Terror. Because in that instant, he understood what I understood, what Rebecca understood, what everyone would soon understand. He'd tried to murder his own mother, and he'd failed. And now his mother was standing on his doorstep, very much alive, and she knew everything. "You're dead," he whispered. Those were the first words out of his mouth. Not "Mom, oh my God, where have you been?" Not "I've been so worried." Just, "You're dead." "No," I said calmly. "I'm not. Though not for lack of trying on your part." He stumbled backward, and I stepped into the house. My house, the one I'd lived in for 36 years, the one he'd stolen from me along with everything else. I closed the door behind me, shutting out the neighbors, the world, Everything except Timothy and me and the reckoning that was 3 decades overdue. I don't understand, Timothy stammered. He was shaking, actually physically shaking. The police said, the missing persons report said exactly what you wanted them to say, I interrupted. That I was depressed. Suicidal. That I'd probably killed myself. Very convenient narrative, Timothy. Almost as convenient as the hit and run you and Peter arranged. His face went from white to grey. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder of screenshots Rebecca had sent me. Should I read them to you? The text messages where you and Peter planned my murder? The calculations of how much my life was worth? The discussion about stolen license plates and broken security cameras? Timothy's legs seemed to give out. He sank down onto the couch, the same couch where I'd sat with him thousands of times, where we'd watched movies and talked about his day and planned his future. Mom, he said, and his voice cracked. Mom, please. I can explain. Explain what? My voice was sharp, cutting. Explain why you tried to kill me for insurance money. Explain why you spent 2 years planning to murder your own mother. Please, Timothy. I'm dying to hear this explanation. He put his head in his hands. For a moment, I thought he might actually cry. Part of me, the part that was still his mother, that still remembered rocking him to sleep and bandaging his scraped knees, wanted to comfort him. But that part was small and getting smaller by the second. I was desperate, he finally said. The debt. Rebecca doesn't know how bad it got. I was drowning. The mortgage, the loans, the credit cards. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. Every day, collection agencies calling, threatening letters. I was going to lose everything. So you decided to kill me. It wasn't a question. I didn't want to, he said, looking up at me with eyes that were red but dry. I never wanted to hurt you, Mom. But I didn't see any other way. You are, old. You've had a good life. And I needed my money, I finished for him. You needed my money. Money I would have given you if you'd just asked. Money I would have loaned you, helped you with, figured out together. But that wasn't enough, was it? You wanted it all. And you wanted it now. You don't understand, Timothy said, and now there was a defensive edge creeping into his voice. You've always had enough. You and Dad, you never struggled, never had to worry about money. You don't know what it's like to lie awake at night wondering how you're going to feed your kids, how you're going to keep a roof over their heads. Don't you dare, I cut him off, my voice rising. Don't you dare talk to me about struggling. Your father and I worked our asses off to build the life we had. We sacrificed. We saved. We made hard choices. And we did it without murdering anyone. Timothy flinched. I didn't actually do it, though. You're alive. You're fine. The audacity of that statement, the sheer, breathtaking gall, made me laugh. It wasn't a pleasant sound. I'm fine? Timothy, I've spent the last 3 months living in hiding, terrified that you'd find me, that you'd try again. I've watched you hold a memorial service for me, watched you cry fake tears and collect sympathy from people who actually cared about me. I've watched you cash the insurance checks and spend my money like it was a prize you'd won. And you think I'm fine? What do you want from me? Timothy asked, and now he sounded angry. Defensive. Like he was the victim in this situation. You want me to apologize? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I tried to do what I did. But you have to understand, I was desperate. People do things when they're desperate. Not murder, I said flatly. Most people, when they're desperate, don't decide to kill their parents. Most people have a conscience. A soul. Something that stops them from crossing that line. So what now? Timothy stood up, and I noticed he was positioning himself between me and the front door. You're going to turn me in? Send me to prison? Destroy my family? Your family? I almost laughed again. Timothy, Rebecca knows. She's known since before you even tried to kill me. She's the one who warned me. She's the one who saved my life. Your wife chose me over you. What does that tell you? The color drained from his face again. Rebecca, she knows. She knows everything. The surveillance photos, the text messages, the planning. She found it all on your computer. And instead of protecting you, instead of staying silent, she risked everything to save me. I took a step closer to him. Your wife has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire body. Where is she? Timothy looked around wildly, like Rebecca might be hiding somewhere in the house. Where are my kids? Somewhere safe. Somewhere you can't use them as leverage or hurt them or manipulate them into lying for you. I pulled out my phone again. And now we're going to have a conversation about what happens next. Because you have two choices, Timothy. Two ways this can play out. What choices? He asked warily. Choice 1, I call the police right now. I give them all the evidence, the photos, the texts, the forged insurance policy, everything. They arrest you for attempted murder, insurance fraud, probably a dozen other charges. You go to trial. You go to prison. You lose your law license, your career, your reputation, your freedom. Your children grow up knowing their father tried to kill their grandmother. That's choice 1. Timothy was breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. What's choice 2? Choice 2, you confess. You go to the police yourself, you tell them everything you did, and you plead guilty. You show genuine remorse. You throw yourself on the mercy of the court. You might still go to prison. Probably will, actually. But at least you'll have some dignity left. At least you'll be able to tell your children that in the end, you tried to do the right thing. That's not a choice, Timothy said bitterly. Both options end with me in prison. Yes, I agreed. They do. Because what you did was unforgivable. There's no version of this story where you walk away free. The only question is whether you go down fighting, lying to the end, or whether you finally take responsibility for your actions. Timothy was quiet for a long moment. I could see him thinking, calculating, trying to find some third option that I hadn't considered. What about Peter? He finally asked. What about him? He was driving the car. He was the one who actually tried to. He's just as guilty as I am. More guilty, maybe. Peter is going to face the same choices you are, I said. I'm going to his house next. But right now, we're talking about you. About what kind of man you want to be in the face of what you've done. Timothy's voice broke. I don't know how to come back from this, Mom. I don't know how to fix it. You can't fix it, I said quietly. That's what you don't understand. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. You can't try to murder me. You can't take back the planning, the surveillance, the moment when you told Peter to hit the gas and run me down in the street. That's done. That's permanent. So there's no forgiveness? Timothy asked, and for the first time, I heard something like genuine emotion in his voice. No chance for redemption. I thought about that question. Thought about all the years I'd spent loving him, raising him, believing in him. Thought about the little boy who'd been afraid of thunderstorms and the man who'd tried to kill me for money. Thought about whether there was any part of my son left worth saving. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe someday. Maybe after you've served your time, after you've proven that you understand the magnitude of what you did, after you've spent years making amends. Maybe then. But not now. Not today. Today, you're just the man who tried to murder his mother. And that's all you get to be. Timothy sank back down onto the couch, his head in his hands. I don't want to go to prison, he whispered. Please, Mom. Isn't there some other way? And in that moment, I saw him clearly. Not as my son. Not as the baby I'd brought into this world or the child I'd raised. Just as a man who'd committed a terrible crime and was now trying to escape the consequences. A man who was still, even now, thinking about himself instead of what he'd done to me. No, I said. There's no other way. And you know what? I gave you two choices out of respect for the fact that you came from my body, that I loved you once. But the truth is, I don't actually need you to choose. Because I've already called the police. Timothy's head snapped up. What? They're on their way here right now. Detective Walsh and her team, they've been building a case against you for months, ever since I came out of hiding. They have everything. The evidence, the witnesses, the financial records showing you deposited the insurance money. They have it all. You. Timothy stood up, his face twisted with rage. You tricked me. This whole conversation, you were just stalling. I was giving you one last chance to do the right thing, I corrected. And you failed. Just like you've failed at everything that mattered. Being a good son. Being an honest man. Being someone I could be proud of. Outside, I heard sirens approaching. Timothy heard them too. He looked at the door, then back at me, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. Could he run? Could he fight? Could he somehow still escape this? Don't, I said quietly. Don't make this worse than it already is. The sirens got louder. Closer. Timothy's shoulders slumped. All the fight went out of him, and he looked like what he was, a man who'd gambled everything and lost. There was a loud knock at the door. Police. Open up. I walked past Timothy and opened the door. Detective Walsh stood there with 4 uniformed officers behind her. She looked at me, then at Timothy, and nodded. Eleanor. Good to see you. Good to see you too, Detective. She turned her attention to Timothy. Timothy Hoffman, you're under arrest for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. As she read him his rights and the officers handcuffed him, Timothy kept staring at me. There were no tears now. No remorse. Just shock and anger and a kind of desperate disbelief. Mom, he said as they started leading him toward the door. Mom, please. Don't do this. I'm your son. I looked at him for a long moment. No, I said finally. You're not. My son died 3 months ago when he decided my life was worth less than $1 million. The person standing here now is just a criminal who happens to share my DNA. They took him away. I watched from my doorway as they put him in the back of the police car, as the neighbors came out to watch, as the life he tried to build on my death crumbled around him. Detective Walsh stayed behind. You okay? She asked. No, I admitted. But I will be. We're heading to Peter Hoffman's place next. You want to come? I thought about it. Thought about confronting my nephew the same way I'd confronted my son. But I was tired. So tired. The adrenaline that had been sustaining me for months was finally running out, and all I wanted was to sit down and maybe cry and try to figure out what came next. No, I said. I think I've had enough confrontations for one day. Just make sure he knows. Make sure he understands that I survived. That we all survived. And that they failed. Detective Walsh nodded. Will do. And Eleanor? For what it's worth, I think you handled this with a lot more grace than most people would have. You could have just disappeared, let them think they got away with it. Coming back, facing them, making sure they faced justice, that took courage. Or revenge, I said quietly. I'm not sure there's much difference at this point. She smiled slightly. Maybe not. But either way, you won. They tried to erase you, and instead, you erased them. After she left, I stood in my house again, now that I was alive, and looked around. Everything was exactly as I'd left it 3 months ago. Timothy hadn't changed anything, hadn't packed up my belongings or sold my furniture. He'd just moved in and started living here, like I'd never existed at all. I was going to have to sage this place. Exorcise his presence. Make it mine again. But first, I needed to call Rebecca and tell her it was over. Tell her she could come home, bring the children, start rebuilding her life. She'd been so brave, so strong. She deserved to know that her courage had meant something. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. She answered on the first ring. It's done, I said. They arrested him. It's over. I heard her sob with relief on the other end of the line. Thank God. Thank God. You and the kids can come home. You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore. Eleanor, Rebecca said through her tears. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner, I should have. You saved my life, I interrupted gently. You risked everything to warn me. You've nothing to be sorry for. We talked for a few more minutes, making plans, discussing next steps. When I finally hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, hope. Not happiness, that would take a long time, maybe forever. But hope that maybe, eventually, things could be okay. That maybe I could rebuild my life, find some kind of peace, learn to live with the fact that my son had tried to kill me. Maybe. I walked through the house, room by room, saying goodbye to the woman I'd been before all this started. The naive mother who'd thought her son loved her. The trusting woman who'd never suspected that evil could wear such a familiar face. That woman was gone. And in her place was someone harder, colder, more careful. Someone who'd died and come back. Someone who'd survived. The trial took 8 months. 8 months of depositions and hearings and lawyers arguing over every detail of what Timothy and Peter had done. 8 months of seeing my son in an orange jumpsuit, sitting at the defense table, refusing to look at me. 8 months of Peter's attorney trying to claim he'd been coerced, that Timothy had manipulated him, that he was really just another victim in all this. It was all lies, of course. The evidence was overwhelming. The text messages, the surveillance photos, the forged insurance policy, the financial records showing they'd both started spending money before they'd even confirmed I was dead. Judith, my private investigator, had done her job well. Every piece of evidence was documented, verified, admissible in court. Rebecca testified. That was the hardest part, watching her sit in the witness box and describe finding the files on Timothy's computer, realizing what he was planning, making the agonizing decision to warn me instead of protecting her husband. She cried through most of her testimony. The defense attorney tried to make her look like a bitter wife, someone seeking revenge on her husband for unrelated marital problems. But the jury saw through it. They saw a woman who'd chosen right over wrong, even when it cost her everything. Timothy never testified. His lawyers advised against it, probably because they knew he'd either perjure himself or admit to things that would make his sentence worse. So he just sat there, day after day, while prosecutors laid out exactly how he'd planned to murder his own mother for insurance money. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, insurance fraud, conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison. With good behavior, he might get out in 18. Peter got 20 years. His lawyer had negotiated a slightly lesser sentence in exchange for testifying against Timothy, for admitting that Timothy had been the mastermind. It didn't matter much, they were both going to prison for a very long time. I sat in the courtroom and watched the bailiffs lead them away. Timothy looked back at me once, just before they took him through the door. I couldn't read the expression on his face. Anger? Regret? Fear? Maybe all three. Maybe none. I'd spent 34 years thinking I knew him, and I'd been completely wrong. I wasn't going to make the mistake of thinking I could read him now. After the sentencing, reporters swarmed me outside the courthouse. They'd been following the case since the arrest. Son tries to murder mother for insurance money had been headline news for weeks. Everyone wanted to know how I felt, what I was thinking, whether I'd ever forgive Timothy. I'm glad justice was served, I said into the cameras. And I hope this serves as a reminder that family isn't just about blood. It's about love, respect, loyalty. My son forgot that. And now he's paying the price. Someone asked if I planned to visit him in prison. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. No. I died for him once already. I'm not going to waste any more of my life on him now. That quote made all the papers. Some people thought I was cold, heartless, unforgiving. But most people understood. Most people, when they really thought about it, realized that there are some things that simply can't be forgiven. Trying to murder your own mother is one of them. Life after the trial was strange. I'd survived attempted murder, faked my own death, brought down my own son and nephew. People recognized me on the street, in the grocery store, at church. Some wanted to offer sympathy. Others wanted to hear the story firsthand. A few seemed to think I should have handled it differently, should have gone to the police immediately, should have been more forgiving. I stopped caring what people thought pretty quickly. I'd learned a valuable lesson through all of this. The only person whose opinion of me mattered was me. And I could live with what I'd done. I could look at myself in the mirror every morning and feel proud that I'd survived, that I'd fought back, that I'd refused to be a victim. Rebecca and the kids, I saw them every week. She'd filed for divorce from Timothy the day after his arrest, and it had gone through quickly given the circumstances. She'd kept the house, got full custody of the children, even managed to negotiate a decent settlement from Timothy's frozen assets before they were seized to pay restitution and legal fees. The kids were young enough that they didn't fully understand what their father had done. Rebecca told them he'd made some bad choices and had to go away for a while. When they were older, when they could understand, she'd tell them the truth. But for now, she was just trying to give them as normal a childhood as possible. I tried to help. I babysat when Rebecca needed time to herself. I took the kids to the park, to museums, to ice cream shops. I tried to be the grandmother they deserved, even though every time I looked at them, I saw Timothy's features in their faces and had to push down the complicated feelings that stirred up. They weren't him. They were innocent. They deserved love and stability and a grandmother who didn't visit their father's sins upon them. So I loved them. I showed up. I was present. But I was different now. Everyone could see it. I was harder, more guarded, less quick to trust. My friend Patricia said I'd lost my sparkle, that I seemed diminished somehow. I didn't argue with her. I had lost something, maybe innocence, maybe faith in humanity, maybe just the ability to believe that people were fundamentally good. What I'd gained in exchange was strength. Resilience. The knowledge that I could survive anything, even the worst betrayal imaginable. 6 months after the trial, I was contacted by a literary agent. She wanted to know if I'd be interested in writing a book about my experience. "Your story is incredible," she said. "Inspiring. People need to hear it." I thought about it for a long time. Did I want to relive the worst period of my life for public consumption? Did I want to expose all the painful details, the moments of fear and desperation and rage? But then I realized, my story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about survival. It was about a woman who refused to be a victim, who fought back, who took control of her own narrative. And maybe, just maybe, telling that story could help someone else who was facing their own impossible situation. So I agreed. I spent the next year writing a memoir, working with the agent and an editor, crafting the narrative of how I'd died and come back to life. How I'd turned the tables on my would-be murderer. How I'd chosen revenge and justice over fear and victimhood. The book came out 2 years after Timothy's conviction. It was called The Empty Grave: How I Survived My Son's Plot to Kill Me. It became a bestseller almost immediately. Oprah wanted to interview me. I was on Good Morning America, The Today Show, every major news program. People couldn't get enough of the story. Some of the attention was uncomfortable. I didn't love being recognized everywhere I went, didn't enjoy strangers coming up to me in restaurants to tell me how brave I was or how sorry they were for what I'd been through. But mostly, the response was positive. Women, especially older women, reached out to share their own stories of betrayal, of being underestimated, of finding strength they didn't know they had. "You showed us we don't have to be victims," one woman wrote to me. "You showed us we can fight back." That made it all worthwhile. The exposure, the discomfort, the constant reliving of trauma. It was worth it if even one person felt empowered by my story. 3 years after the trial, I received a letter from Timothy. It had been forwarded through my publisher. I'd never given him my address, never wanted him to know where I lived. The envelope had been opened and checked by prison security, and I could see his handwriting on the envelope. It still looked the same as it had when he was a boy, learning cursive in 3rd grade, practicing writing his name over and over until it was perfect. I almost threw it away without reading it. But curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know what he could possibly say to me after everything he'd done. The letter was short. Just 1 page, handwritten on lined paper. "Mom," it began. Not "Dear Mom" or to Eleanor. Just "Mom. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I don't deserve to speak to you, or write to you, or even think about you. But I need you to know something. I need you to understand. I was wrong. Not just about what I tried to do. I know that was wrong, obviously, everyone has made that very clear. But I was wrong about you. About what you meant to me. About what I threw away. In here, I've had a lot of time to think. About my life. About the choices I made. About the moment when I decided that money was more important than you. And I still don't understand how I got to that place. How I became someone who could look at his own mother and see nothing but dollar signs. I miss you. I know I have no right to miss you. I know I destroyed any claim I had to your love, your time, your forgiveness. But I miss you anyway. I miss calling you on Sunday mornings. I miss bringing the kids to visit. I miss having a mother. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and I don't expect it. I'm not asking you to visit, or write back, or acknowledge this letter in any way. I'm just telling you that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. For everything. I hope you're happy. I hope you found peace. I hope your life is good and full and everything it should be. You deserve that. You always deserved that. I love you. I know that means nothing now, but it's true. I love you, and I'm sorry. Timothy. I read the letter 3 times. Looking for manipulation, for hidden meanings, for some sign that this was just another performance. But if it was a performance, it was a convincing one. The handwriting was shaky, like he'd been crying while he wrote. There were water stains on the paper that could have been tears. Maybe he meant it. Maybe 3 years in prison had finally given him the perspective to understand what he'd done. Maybe he genuinely regretted his actions. Or maybe he'd just learned to fake remorse better. Maybe this was his latest manipulation, his newest attempt to get something from me. If not money, then absolution. Forgiveness that would make him feel better about himself. I didn't know which it was. And I realized, sitting there with that letter in my hands, that I didn't care. Whether Timothy's regret was real or fake, whether he genuinely changed or was still the same manipulative person he'd always been, it didn't matter. Because I was done. Done trying to understand him, done trying to fix him, done letting him occupy space in my heart and mind. He tried to kill me. That was the only fact that mattered. Everything else, his motivations, his regrets, his current state of mind, was irrelevant. I put the letter in a drawer and never looked at it again. People asked me sometimes if I ever thought about forgiving Timothy. If I ever considered visiting him in prison, trying to rebuild some kind of relationship. The answer was always no. Not because I was cruel or heartless, but because I'd learned something crucial through all of this. Forgiveness isn't mandatory. You don't owe it to people just because they're family. You don't have to forgive someone just because they say they're sorry. Some betrayals are unforgivable. Some actions permanently sever the bonds between people. And that's okay. It's okay to walk away. It's okay to protect yourself. It's okay to say you hurt me too badly, and I'm done. That's what I said to Timothy, not in words but in silence. In the lack of response to his letter. In the continued absence of my presence in his life. I was done. 4 years after the trial, Rebecca remarried. A nice man named David, yes, the same name as my late husband, which felt like some kind of cosmic joke, who worked as a high school teacher and treated her like she hung the moon. He was good to the kids, patient and kind, everything Timothy hadn't been even before he tried to kill me. I walked Rebecca down the aisle at her wedding. It felt right. Somehow. She'd saved my life, and now I was giving her away to a new one. A better one. One built on honesty and trust instead of lies and murder plots. The kids called David Dad within 6 months. They stopped asking about Timothy, stopped requesting visits to the prison. Rebecca had been honest with them as they got older, had told them the truth about what their biological father had done. They'd been angry, then sad, then eventually just accepting. Timothy became a cautionary tale in their lives, a reminder of what happens when you let greed and desperation override your humanity. I hoped they'd remember that lesson. I hoped they'd grow up to be better people than their father had been. As for me, I settled into my new life. I traveled, something David and I had always planned to do more of but never quite got around to. I went to Europe, to Asia, to South America. I saw the Colosseum and the Great Wall and Machu Picchu. I stood in places that had existed for thousands of years and felt the weight of my own smallness, my own insignificance in the grand scheme of things. It was freeing, in a way. My story, Timothy's betrayal, my survival, the whole dramatic saga, it had felt so enormous when I was living through it. But standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon or looking up at the Northern Lights, I realized it was just one small story among billions. I was just one person who'd survived something terrible. The world kept turning. Life went on. I also started volunteering. I worked with a domestic violence shelter, helping women who were trying to escape abusive situations. I understood what it was like to be afraid of someone who was supposed to love you, to have to plan an escape, to rebuild your life from nothing. I could offer practical advice, emotional support, and most importantly, hope. Hope that they could survive. That they could fight back. That they could win. That work gave me purpose. It gave meaning to everything I'd been through. If my suffering could help even one woman escape her own nightmare, then maybe it hadn't been entirely pointless. 5 years after the trial, I received another letter from Timothy. This one was longer, more detailed. He wrote about his life in prison, about the therapy he was doing, about how he'd joined a group for inmates trying to understand and atone for their crimes. He wrote about how he thought about me every day, about the kids he'd lost, about the life he'd destroyed. "I'm not asking for anything," he wrote. "I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. Trying to understand how I became someone who could do what I did. Trying to make sure that if I ever get out of here, I'll never hurt anyone again. I read that letter too. And then I put it in the drawer with the first one and forgot about it. 6 years. 7. 8. The letters kept coming, about once a year. I read some of them, ignored others. They all said essentially the same thing. I'm sorry, I was wrong, I'm trying to change. Maybe he was. Maybe he wasn't. It didn't concern me anymore. My life had moved on. I'd written a second book, this one about healing and resilience. I'd become a speaker, traveling to conferences and events to talk about survival and empowerment. I'd built a life that was full and meaningful and entirely my own. Timothy was just a ghost in my past. A shadow that occasionally crossed my mind but no longer had the power to hurt me. On the 10th anniversary of his conviction, a reporter asked me if I felt any different about what had happened. If time had softened my anger, made me more open to reconciliation. No, I said honestly. Time hasn't changed what he did. It hasn't made his betrayal any less terrible or his crime any less unforgivable. What time has done is allowed me to build a life where he doesn't matter anymore. Where his actions don't define me. Where I'm not the woman whose son tried to kill her, I'm just Eleanor, and I'm doing just fine. That became another popular quote, another soundbite that got shared on social media and printed on inspirational posters. I'm not the woman whose son tried to kill her. I'm just Eleanor, and I'm doing just fine. And it was true. I was doing fine. Better than fine. Actually. I was happy. Not every day, not every moment. There were still times when grief and anger and the sheer weight of betrayal crashed over me like a wave. But mostly, I was okay. I'd survived the unsurvivable. I'd come back from the dead. I'd reclaimed my life. And really, what more could anyone ask for? The last time I thought seriously about Timothy was at Rebecca's daughter's high school graduation. My granddaughter, so smart, so beautiful, with her whole life ahead of her, walked across that stage to receive her diploma, and I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Pride in who she'd become. Sadness that David wasn't there to see it. And a strange, distant grief for Timothy, who'd thrown away his chance to be part of these moments. He could have been there. He could have watched his daughter grow up, could have been the father she deserved, could have been part of this family. Instead, he was in a prison cell, serving time for trying to murder me. That was his choice. His consequence. His loss. Not mine. I applauded as my granddaughter received her diploma, and I felt nothing but joy. Pure, uncomplicated happiness for this young woman who'd overcome so much and was now heading off to college to study medicine. She wanted to be a doctor, to help people, to make a difference in the world. She was going to be amazing. And I was going to be there to see it, to support her, to be the grandmother she deserved. Because I was alive. I'd survived. And I was going to make damn sure that every day I had left counted for something. That's what revenge really looks like, I realized. Not destroying the person who hurt you, though I'd done that too. But living. Thriving. Building a life so full and rich and meaningful that they become irrelevant. Timothy had tried to erase me from the world. Instead, I'd erased him from my life. And I'd never felt freer. I turned 73 years old on a Wednesday in September, 12 years after Timothy tried to kill me. Rebecca threw me a party, nothing fancy, just family and a few close friends in her backyard, with a homemade cake and too many candles and grandchildren who'd grown into teenagers and young adults I barely recognized. My grandson, Timothy Jr., they called him TJ now, had since he was old enough to understand the weight his name carried, was 18 and about to leave for college. My granddaughter Melissa was 20 and in her junior year of medical school, top of her class, brilliant and compassionate and everything her father should have been. They hugged me, these kids who'd lost their father to his own greed and stupidity, and told me they loved me. Melissa made a toast to Grandma Eleanor, who taught us that survival isn't just about staying alive, it's about choosing to live. I cried. I wasn't ashamed of it. These kids had every reason to be bitter, damaged, broken by what their father had done. Instead, they were thriving. Rebecca had raised them right, had taught them that they weren't defined by their father's crimes, that they could choose to be better. They'd chosen better. And watching them, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, pride in my family. Not the family I'd been born into or created, but the family that had survived. The ones who'd chosen each other, chosen love, chosen to keep going even when it would have been easier to fall apart. After the cake, after the presents, after the grandkids had gone inside to watch a movie, Rebecca and I sat on her back porch in the cooling evening air. She was 50 now, with grey starting to thread through her dark hair, and lines around her eyes that spoke of hard years and harder choices. "I got a letter from him," she said quietly. She didn't have to specify who him was. There was only one him that mattered in this context. "I don't want to know," I said automatically, my standard response to anything Timothy related. "He's up for parole next year," Rebecca continued anyway. "His lawyer wrote to me. Asked if I'd be willing to testify on his behalf. Said he's been a model prisoner, completed all his programs, shown genuine rehabilitation." I felt my chest tighten. "Tell me you're not considering it." "No," Rebecca said firmly. "I already told them no. I told them that Timothy made his choices, and I made mine, and I'm not going to help him escape the consequences of what he did. But I thought you should know. In case they reach out to you too." They had, actually. 3 times in the past month. Timothy's parole attorney, a earnest-sounding young woman who kept leaving messages about how much Timothy had changed, how he'd found God in prison, how he wanted to make amends. I'd deleted every message without listening to the whole thing. "He's not getting out," I said, more to convince myself than Rebecca. "They won't grant parole for attempted murder. Not after only 13 years. "Maybe not," Rebecca agreed. "But the system is unpredictable. And he's been working the system since day one. Good behavior, therapy, education programs. He's building a case for rehabilitation." The thought of Timothy walking free, of potentially running into him at the grocery store or seeing him at one of the kids' events, made me feel sick. I'd built my life on the foundation of his absence. His imprisonment was the price he'd paid for my survival. If he got out early, if he shortened his sentence through manipulation and good behavior, it would feel like losing all over again. "What do the kids think?" I asked. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "TJ wants nothing to do with him. He's made that clear. He says Timothy stopped being his father the day he tried to kill you, and prison doesn't change that." "Melissa?" She paused. "Melissa's been writing to him." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "What?" "For about 2 years now. She didn't tell me at first. I found out by accident when a letter came to the house. We had a long talk about it. She says she's not excusing what he did, but she wants to understand. She's studying psychology now, along with medicine. She says she needs to understand how someone becomes capable of that kind of evil." "And what has she learned?" I asked bitterly. "That he's still her father," Rebecca said softly. "That he's still human, even though he did an inhuman thing. That forgiveness and reconciliation aren't the same thing, and she can try to understand him without condoning what he did." I wanted to be angry at Melissa. Wanted to feel betrayed that she was communicating with the man who tried to murder me. But I couldn't. She was 20 years old, trying to make sense of an impossible situation, trying to figure out how to reconcile the father she'd loved as a child with the monster who tried to kill her grandmother. That was her journey. Her choice. I couldn't control it any more than I could control Timothy's parole hearing. "Is she going to testify for him?" I asked. "No." She told him she won't do that. She said she's willing to maintain contact, to try to understand, but she won't advocate for his release. She knows what he did was unforgivable. That was something, at least. The parole hearing happened on a cold Tuesday in March, 13 years and 2 months after Timothy's conviction. I didn't attend. Couldn't. The thought of seeing him again, of being in the same room, of hearing him plead his case to a parole board, it was too much. I'd moved on, built a new life, but I wasn't ready for that. Rebecca went, though. Not to support Timothy, but to speak against his release. She testified about the fear she'd lived with, the damage his actions had done to their children, the years of therapy they'd all needed to process what he'd done. She was calm, eloquent, devastating. The parole board denied his release. He'd be eligible to try again in 2 years, but for now, he was staying in prison. I cried when Rebecca called to tell me. Tears of relief, of gratitude, of the delayed trauma that hits you when you realize how close you came to having to face your worst fear. 2 more years, I said. At least 2 more years of peace. He'll probably get out eventually, Rebecca warned. Maybe not in 2 years, but eventually. We need to prepare for that. She was right. Timothy was now 50 years old. He'd served 13 years of a 25-year sentence. With continued good behavior, he could be out in another 5 to 7 years. By the time he was 60, he'd likely be free. And then what? Would he try to contact me? Would he show up at family events? Would I have to see him across a crowded room at TJ's wedding or Melissa's graduation from medical school? The thought made me want to move. Change my name. Disappear again, this time for good. But I was tired of running. Tired of letting Timothy's actions dictate my choices. I'd spent 13 years building a life I loved, and I wasn't going to abandon it just because he might eventually get out of prison. Instead, I made a different choice. I hired a lawyer, a good one, expensive, the kind who doesn't lose, and I filed for a permanent restraining order. I documented everything, the attempted murder, the ongoing letters despite my lack of response, the fear I lived with knowing he might one day be released. I presented the case that Timothy represented a continued threat to my safety and well-being, that his eventual release shouldn't give him access to me or my life. The judge granted it. Timothy would not be allowed to contact me, directly or indirectly, for the rest of my life. He couldn't call, couldn't write, couldn't show up at my house or my speaking engagements or anywhere else I might be. If he violated the order, he'd go straight back to prison. It wasn't perfect protection. Restraining orders are just pieces of paper, and determined people find ways around them. But it was something. It was a legal boundary between me and the man who'd tried to kill me, and it gave me peace. Around that same time, I started having health problems. Nothing dramatic, just the normal wearing down that comes with being in your 70s. My knees hurt. My back ached. I got tired more easily. My doctor started using words like monitoring and managing instead of curing. I was getting old. Really old. Old enough that the 25-year sentence Timothy was serving might outlast my natural life. There was a dark irony in that. He tried to kill me to get his inheritance sooner, and instead, he might end up outliving me anyway. All that planning, all that evil, all those years in prison, and for what? He'd still end up with nothing, because I'd cut him out of my will entirely. Everything would go to Rebecca and the kids, with specific provisions preventing Timothy from accessing any of it even after my death. He'd destroyed his life for money he'd never see. He'd sacrificed his freedom, his family, his soul, for an inheritance that would never be his. If there was justice in the universe, I figured, it looked like that. On my 75th birthday, Melissa asked if she could talk to me about something important. We met for coffee. She'd grown into such a beautiful, thoughtful young woman, and she told me she'd been struggling with something for a long time. I want to forgive him, she said quietly. Not for his sake. For mine. I'm tired of carrying around this anger and hurt. It's eating me alive, Grandma. I need to let it go. I understood what she was saying. Forgiveness isn't about the person who hurt you, it's about freeing yourself from the weight of carrying that hurt. But I also knew that my path wasn't hers. I couldn't forgive Timothy. I tried, in quiet moments over the years, to find some softening in my heart toward him. It never came. Then forgive him, I told Melissa. But know that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean trusting him or welcoming him back into your life. It just means you're choosing not to let what he did poison your future. Is that what you've done? She asked. Forgiven him? No, I admitted. I haven't. And I don't know if I ever will. But that's okay. We each have to find our own way through this. Your way doesn't have to be my way. Melissa nodded, tears in her eyes. I don't think I could be as strong as you. You're already stronger, I told her. You're choosing healing over bitterness. That takes more strength than revenge ever did. 2 years later, Timothy had his second parole hearing. This time, Melissa testified on his behalf. Not to excuse what he'd done, but to speak to the person she'd come to know through their letters. The remorseful man who'd spent 15 years trying to understand how he'd become a killer. The grandfather who'd never met his grandson's children but had seen their pictures and cried. The broken human being who'd destroyed everything and was trying, however imperfectly, to put some pieces back together. The parole board granted his release. He'd serve 3 more years under strict supervision, with ankle monitoring and regular check-ins and a long list of conditions. But at age 52, after serving 18 years of his sentence, Timothy Hoffman would be free. I cried when I heard the news. Not tears of rage or fear, though I felt both. These were tears of exhaustion. I was tired. So tired of this story, this man, This weight I'd been carrying for 18 years. I wanted it to be over. I wanted to stop being the woman whose son tried to kill her and just be Eleanor again. Just a 77-year-old woman who'd lived a long, complicated, sometimes beautiful life. But I knew it would never truly be over. Timothy's release didn't erase what he'd done. It didn't cancel out the betrayal, the fear, the years I'd lost to survival and recovery. It just meant the story was entering its final chapter. And I was going to make damn sure I wrote the ending myself. Timothy got out of prison on a Thursday in October, 18 years and 3 months after he was first imprisoned for trying to murder me. I know the exact date because Rebecca called to tell me, her voice tight with worry, asking if I was okay, if I needed anything, if I wanted her to come stay with me for a few days. I told her I was fine. It was only partially true. The restraining order was still in effect. Timothy couldn't legally come near me, couldn't contact me, couldn't be within 500 feet of my home or any place he knew I frequented. But legal restrictions only work if people follow them. And I'd learned 18 years ago that Timothy wasn't particularly good at following rules when they inconvenienced him. For the first few weeks after his release, I was hypervigilant. I checked over my shoulder constantly. I varied my routines. I had new locks installed on my doors and a security system put in. I even considered buying another gun, though I ultimately decided against it. I'd survived this long without becoming someone who lived in fear, and I wasn't going to let Timothy's release change that. Gradually, as weeks turned into months and there were no incidents, no violations, no sign of Timothy at all, I started to relax. Maybe the restraining order was working. Maybe 18 years in prison had actually taught him something about respecting boundaries. Or maybe he just had no interest in seeing me anymore. 6 months after his release, Rebecca told me Timothy had gotten a job. A friend from his old law firm had hired him as a paralegal. He couldn't practice law anymore, having been disbarred after his conviction, but he could do research, file documents, support other attorneys. It was a huge step down from what he'd been, but it was honest work. Legal work, in the most literal sense. He was also living in a halfway house, attending mandatory therapy, meeting regularly with his parole officer, following all the rules, checking all the boxes, being a model parolee just like he'd been a model prisoner. Part of me wanted to believe he'd actually changed. That 18 years had been enough time for him to understand the magnitude of what he'd done, to develop genuine remorse, to become someone different. But I'd believed in Timothy once before. I'd believed he was a good man, a loving son, someone who would never hurt me. And I'd been catastrophically wrong. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. A year after Timothy's release, Melissa got engaged. Her fiancé was a resident at the same hospital where she worked, a kind man named James who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The wedding was planned for the following summer. A small ceremony, just family and close friends. I want to invite him, Melissa told me one afternoon as we were going through guest lists. Dad. I want him at my wedding. My heart sank. Melissa. I know, she interrupted. I know what he did. I know he tried to kill you. I know he doesn't deserve to be there. But he's still my father, Grandma. And I need him there. I need to have both of my parents at my wedding. He can't be within 500 feet of me, I pointed out. The restraining order. We can work around it, Melissa said quietly. You could skip the ceremony, just come to the reception. Or we could have 2 separate events. Or I could just not come, I said, and watched her face crumble. Please don't say that. This is my wedding, Grandma. I need you there. You're one of the most important people in my life. Then don't invite the man who tried to murder me, I said, more sharply than I intended. Make a choice, Melissa. Him or me. Because you can't have both. It was cruel. I knew it was cruel even as the words were leaving my mouth. This was her wedding, her day, her choice to make. I was putting her in an impossible position, forcing her to choose between her father and her grandmother. But I couldn't help it. The thought of Timothy being at Melissa's wedding, of him walking her down the aisle or giving a toast or celebrating this moment that should have been pure joy, it made me feel physically ill. He'd given up his right to these moments when he tried to kill me. He didn't get to waltz back into the family and pretend everything was fine just because he'd served his time. Melissa left my house in tears. We didn't speak for 2 weeks, the longest we'd gone without talking since she was a baby. Rebecca finally mediated, getting us both on a phone call and forcing us to actually communicate instead of just feeling hurt and angry. I understand why you don't want Timothy there, Melissa said, her voice thick with emotion. And I understand why Grandma doesn't want to be in the same space as him. But this is my wedding. And I need both of you there. So we're going to figure out a compromise, because the alternative is me getting married without either my father or my grandmother, and that's not acceptable. In the end, we worked out a solution. Timothy would attend the ceremony but leave immediately after. I would arrive for the reception, after he was gone. They'd be scheduled with enough gap time that there was no risk of us crossing paths. Melissa would get photos with both of us separately. It wasn't perfect, but it was possible. I'm sorry, Melissa said to me after we'd worked out the details. I'm sorry that I need him there. I know it's not fair to you. Life isn't fair, I said gently. You learned that lesson young. But you're not responsible for what your father did, and you shouldn't have to lose him entirely just because he tried to kill me. Your relationship with him is yours to define. Do you hate me for forgiving him? She asked quietly. No, I said honestly. I don't understand it. But I don't hate you for it. You're choosing healing. That's brave. The wedding was beautiful. I arrived at the reception to find Melissa glowing, radiant in her dress, dancing with her new husband while their friends cheered. Rebecca hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for being here." I looked around at the celebration, at the family we'd built from the ashes of Timothy's betrayal. TJ was there with his girlfriend. Rebecca's husband David was there, the man who'd stepped into the father role and done it with grace and love. All of Melissa's friends, her colleagues, people who cared about her and wanted to celebrate this moment. And Timothy was gone. He'd attended the ceremony, had his moment, and then left as agreed. He'd followed the rules, respected the boundaries, done what he was supposed to do. Maybe he really had changed. Or maybe he was just better at playing the game now. I danced at Melissa's wedding. I gave a toast about love and resilience and choosing happiness even when life tries to break you. I celebrated my granddaughter's new beginning and tried not to think about the ghost who'd been there earlier, the man whose absence was as present as anyone in that room. 2 years after his release, Rebecca told me Timothy had gotten remarried. A woman he'd met at his therapy group, someone who knew his whole story and had chosen him anyway. They were living together in a modest apartment, both working, both trying to build normal lives. He seems happy, Rebecca said carefully, watching my face for a reaction. I didn't know what to feel about that. Was I angry that he got to be happy after what he'd done? Relieved that he'd found someone else and wouldn't try to worm his way back into our lives? Sad that the boy I'd raised had grown into this stranger who I knew nothing about? All of it. None of it. Mostly I just felt empty. Good for him, I said finally. I hope she knows what she's getting into. 3 years after his release, I was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer. Non-smoker's lung cancer, the doctors said, just bad luck. Treatable but not curable. I had maybe 2 to 3 years left, they estimated, possibly more with aggressive treatment. I opted for moderate treatment. Chemo to slow the progression, medication to manage symptoms, but no experimental procedures or surgeries that would sacrifice quality of life for quantity. I'd lived a long time. I'd survived things I shouldn't have survived. When it was my time, I was ready to go. Melissa asked if she could tell Timothy. He'd want to know, she said. Why? I asked. So he can feel guilty? So he can finally get what he wanted 18 years ago? I'm dying, Melissa. He's going to get his wish. That's not fair, Melissa said quietly. He's not the same person he was then. Maybe not, I agreed. But I'm still the woman he tried to kill. That doesn't change just because time has passed. She told him anyway. I know because a few days later, I received a letter. Not from Timothy directly, that would violate the restraining order, but through Melissa. He'd written it and asked her to pass it along, making it clear that I didn't have to read it if I didn't want to. I almost threw it away. But curiosity won out. The letter was different from the ones he'd sent years ago. Less apologetic, more reflective. He wrote about his life after prison, about learning to live with what he'd done, about accepting that some things can never be made right. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything from you, he wrote. Not forgiveness, not understanding, not even acknowledgement. You owe me nothing. But I wanted you to know that not a day goes by that I don't think about what I did. Not a day goes by that I don't wish I could go back and make different choices. Be a different person. Be the son you deserved. I'm not asking to see you. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. And that hearing about your illness, it hurt. Because even though I have no right to care, even though I gave up that right 18 years ago, I still do. You're still my mother. And I still love you. And I'm sorry that I'll never have the chance to show you that I changed. That I became better. That I understood, finally, what I threw away. I hope you're not in pain. I hope whatever time you have left is peaceful and full of love. You deserve that. You always deserved that. Timothy. I read it twice. Then I put it away and tried not to think about it. Did I believe he'd changed? Maybe. Prison changes people. And 18 years is a long time. The Timothy who'd gotten out wasn't the same man who'd gone in. The question was whether the changes were real or just survival adaptations, whether he'd genuinely developed empathy and remorse or just learned to fake them better. I'd never know for sure. And it didn't matter anyway. Changed or not, redeemed or not, he was still the man who'd tried to kill me. That fact didn't go away just because he'd served his time and said he was sorry. As my cancer progressed and my time grew shorter, people kept asking if I was going to reconcile with Timothy before I died. If I was going to grant him forgiveness, give him peace, let him say goodbye. My answer was always the same, no. Not because I was cruel or vindictive, but because I didn't owe him that. I didn't owe him closure or peace of mind or the comfort of knowing I'd forgiven him. He tried to kill me. That wasn't the kind of wound that healed just because time passed. Some people understood. Others thought I was being stubborn, holding on to anger that would hurt me more than him, missing an opportunity for peace before I died. But I was at peace. I'd built a beautiful life after my resurrection. I'd traveled, loved, helped people, made a difference. I'd watched my grandchildren grow up. I'd written books and given speeches and shown thousands of people that survival was possible. I'd won. Timothy had tried to erase me, and instead, I'd lived more fully and meaningfully than I ever had before. That was my revenge. That was my victory. And I didn't need his forgiveness to complete it. I'm 81 years old now. The cancer has progressed to the point where the doctors have stopped talking about treatment and started talking about making me comfortable. I have weeks, maybe a month or two. I can feel my body shutting down, piece by piece, system by system. It's not painful, mostly, the medication sees to that. It's just gradual. Like slowly fading out of existence. I'm okay with it. I've lived a long life. Longer than I expected after that March morning when Peter accelerated toward me in that crosswalk. Every day since then has been borrowed time, a gift I gave myself by refusing to be a victim. I'm in hospice now, at Rebecca's house. She insisted, and I didn't have the energy to argue. The guest room has been converted into a hospital room of sorts, medical bed, monitors, all the equipment that comes with dying slowly. But Rebecca also filled it with my things. My favorite books. Photographs from my travels. The quilt David's mother made for us as a wedding present. It's a good place to die. Better than I deserve, maybe, but I'll take it. Melissa visits every day after her shift at the hospital. She's a full doctor now, an oncologist specializing in the very cancer that's killing me. The irony isn't lost on either of us. She sits by my bed and tells me about her patients, about the ones she's saving, about the ones she can't. She holds my hand and sometimes we talk, and sometimes we just sit in comfortable silence. TJ visits too, usually on weekends. He's 30 now, a father himself. His daughter, my great-granddaughter, is 2 years old, with David's eyes and my stubbornness. He brings her to see me, and she climbs carefully onto the bed and pats my hand with her tiny fingers and says great gamma in that precious way toddlers mangle words. I'm grateful I got to meet her. Grateful I lived long enough to see this next generation, to know that the family continues, that Timothy's attempt to end my life didn't end our lineage. Rebecca is with me almost constantly. She's put her own life on hold to care for me in these final weeks, and I've tried to tell her she doesn't have to, that hospice nurses exist for this reason. But she insists. You saved my life, she says simply. You gave me the courage to leave, to protect my children, to build a better life. This is the least I can do. We've had a lot of time to talk, Rebecca and I, during these long days when I'm too weak to do anything but lie here and remember. We've talked about David, about the early years of my marriage, about what love looked like before grief and betrayal complicated it. We've talked about her life with Timothy, about the warning signs she'd missed, about the guilt she carried for not seeing what he was planning sooner. You couldn't have known, I've told her 100 times. He fooled everyone. Even me. Especially me. We've also talked about Timothy. About where he is now, what he's doing, whether he knows I'm dying. He knows. Melissa told him, with my permission this time. I'm past the point of caring whether he knows or not. What's he going to do? Come try to kill me again. I'm already dying. He'd just be redundant at this point. According to Melissa, he took the news hard. Asked if there was any chance he could see me, say goodbye. When she told him no, that I'd explicitly said I didn't want to see him, he'd cried. He said he understood, Melissa told me. He said he knew he didn't deserve to see you, but he'd hoped you might give him that chance anyway. I felt nothing when she told me that. Not satisfaction, not anger, not sympathy. Just emptiness. Timothy had become such a non-entity in my life, such a distant figure from my past, that even his tears didn't move me anymore. Maybe that's what true healing looks like. Not forgiveness, but indifference. The ability to hear about someone who once defined your existence and feel nothing at all. Yesterday, Rebecca asked me if I had any regrets. It's the kind of question people ask the dying, I suppose, looking for wisdom or closure or some final profound truth. I thought about it for a long time before answering. I regret trusting blindly, I finally said. I regret not seeing the signs, not asking harder questions, not protecting myself better. But I don't regret surviving. I don't regret fighting back. And I don't regret refusing to forgive someone who tried to murder me. Those weren't mistakes. Those were choices I made consciously, and I stand by them. What about Timothy? Rebecca asked quietly. Do you regret having him? Raising him? Loving him? Another hard question. Because the truth is complicated. I regret what he became, I said slowly. I regret that all my love, all my effort, all my devotion wasn't enough to make him a good man. But I don't regret having him. He gave me 30 years of believing I was a mother, and most of those years were good. And he gave me Melissa and TJ, even if indirectly. He gave me you, Rebecca. Some good came from it, even if he himself became something terrible. She cried then, and I held her hand as best I could with my limited strength, and we mourned together. Not for Timothy, but for the illusion we'd both believed in. The happy family that never really existed. Last night, I had a dream. I was young again, maybe 30, and I was standing in my kitchen making blueberry muffins. David was alive, sitting at the table reading the newspaper, and Timothy was 7 years old, doing homework at the counter. The sun was streaming through the windows and everything was perfect, peaceful, exactly how I remembered it before I knew the truth. And in the dream, I knew. I knew what Timothy would become, what he would do, the pain he would cause. I could see it all laid out like a map of the future. The debts, the desperation, the surveillance photos, the hit and run, the trial, the letters, all of it. And Dream Me had a choice. I could stop it somehow, change something, alter the timeline to prevent what was coming. Or I could let it play out, knowing where it would lead. I chose to let it play out. Because even knowing everything, even seeing the betrayal coming, I couldn't imagine my life without having lived through it. The survival, the resurrection, the revenge, they'd shaped me into someone stronger than the naive woman I'd been before. And the love I'd found after, with Rebecca, with my grandchildren, with the women I'd helped through my work, that was real in a way my love for Timothy never had been. I woke from the dream feeling peaceful. Like I'd finally answered a question I didn't know I'd been asking. This morning, I asked Rebecca to call everyone. Melissa, TJ, the grandkids, even Rebecca's husband David. I wanted them all here, wanted to see them one more time while I was still lucid enough to really see them, to tell them I loved them, to say the things that needed to be said. They came within hours. My room filled with people I loved, people who'd chosen to be family even when biology failed us. We talked, we laughed, we cried. I told stories about David, about the early days, about the life I'd lived before everything went wrong and then right again. TJ's little girl climbed onto the bed again and fell asleep on my chest, her small weight a reminder that life continues, that new generations rise to replace the old, that none of us are here forever but the love we leave behind might be. As the afternoon faded into evening and people started reluctantly talking about leaving, Melissa pulled me aside. Well, As aside as you can pull someone who can't get out of bed. She leaned close and whispered, "He's outside. Dad. He's been sitting in his car across the street for the last hour. He knows he can't come in because of the restraining order, but he wanted to be close. He wanted. I don't know what he wanted. To say goodbye from a distance, maybe." I closed my eyes and processed that information. Timothy was out there right now, sitting in his car, watching Rebecca's house, knowing I was inside dying. After everything, the attempted murder, the trial, the years in prison, the restraining order, the decades of separation, he was still my son. Still the boy I'd carried for 9 months and brought into this world. Still connected to me by bonds that couldn't be completely severed no matter how much we both might want them to be. Tell him. I paused, trying to find the right words. What did I want to say to the man who tried to kill me? What final message did I want to send into the universe? Tell him I said goodbye. That's all. Just goodbye. Melissa nodded, tears streaming down her face. That's all. That's all, I confirmed. I don't forgive him. I never will. But I acknowledge that he exists, that he was my son once, that this is the end of that story. Goodbye is enough. She went outside. I watched through the window as she crossed the street and approached a dark sedan parked under a tree. The same kind of car Peter had used to try to run me down, though surely not the same one. Timothy got out and Melissa hugged him. They talked for a few minutes, and even from this distance, I could see his shoulders shaking with sobs. Then Melissa handed him something. A photograph, it looked like. One of me. Probably. A final image to remember me by. They talked for a few more minutes, then Melissa came back inside and Timothy drove away. Gone from my life for the last time. The story of us, mother and son, victim and perpetrator, two people who'd loved each other once and then destroyed that love so completely there was nothing left but ashes, was finally over. Melissa came back to my room. He said to tell you he's sorry. And that he loves you. And that he hopes you have peace. I nodded. I do, I said simply. I have peace. And I did. Lying there in that bed, surrounded by the family I'd chosen and who'd chosen me back, I felt more peaceful than I had in years. Maybe ever. The anger that had sustained me through the trial, through the survival, through the long years of building my new life, it was gone now. Not because I'd forgiven Timothy, but because I was done carrying it. Done letting it take up space in my heart. I'd won. I'd survived. I'd lived a full, meaningful life despite someone's best efforts to end it. And now I was dying on my own terms, surrounded by love, having said what needed to be said and left nothing unresolved that mattered. That was victory. That was revenge. That was justice. That evening, as everyone was finally leaving, Melissa lingered. "Grandma," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Anything," I said. "Do you think people can really change? Like, fundamentally change who they are at their core?" I knew she was asking about Timothy. About whether the man who'd cried in his car today was different from the man who'd tried to murder me 20 years ago. About whether her relationship with him was based on reality or delusion. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I think people can change their actions. They can choose to behave differently, to make better decisions. But whether the core of who they are really changes, I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. Does it matter? Doesn't it?" Melissa asked. "What matters," I said, "is that you protect yourself. You can have a relationship with your father if you want, if it brings you something positive. But never forget what he's capable of. Never trust him completely. And never let him convince you that what he did was anything less than unforgivable. You can have compassion for him without condoning what he did. Do you understand?" She nodded. "I understand." "Good," I said. "Now go home to your husband. Live your life. Be happy. That's the best revenge anyone can have, being happy despite everything that tried to break you." After she left, Rebecca helped me settle in for the night. The hospice nurse checked my vitals and adjusted my medication. And then it was just me, alone in the quiet darkness, listening to my own breathing and thinking about everything that had brought me to this moment. 20 years ago, I'd stood in a crosswalk waiting to die. I'd watched a car accelerate toward me, driven by my own nephew, planned by my own son, intended to end my life and leave my family mourning. But I'd survived. Not just physically. I'd survived emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. I'd taken the worst thing that could happen to a person and turned it into fuel for living more fully than I ever had before. I'd written books, traveled the world, helped countless women escape their own impossible situations, watched my grandchildren grow up, found peace and purpose and meaning in a life I'd almost lost. And now, as that life was finally coming to its natural end, I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude that I'd had the chance to live it. Gratitude that I'd been strong enough to fight back. Gratitude that I'd refused to let Timothy's evil define me. I thought about the envelope Rebecca had given me that day in March, so many years ago. The envelope that had saved my life and changed everything. I wondered where it was now, probably in some evidence locker, or maybe destroyed after the trial. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Rebecca had been brave enough to give it to me, that she'd chosen right over wrong even when it cost her everything. That's what I wanted to be remembered for, I realized. Not as the woman whose son tried to kill her. Not as a victim or even a survivor. But as someone who, when faced with an impossible choice, chose right. Chose life. Chose to fight back and win. I drifted off to sleep thinking about that. About legacy and meaning and what we leave behind when we're gone. I died 3 days later. Peacefully, in my sleep, with Rebecca sitting beside my bed holding my hand. The hospice nurse said it was one of the most gentle passings she'd ever witnessed. I just stopped breathing, slipped from sleep into death without any struggle or pain. My funeral was well attended. Friends from my book club and my church, women from the shelter where I'd volunteered, people whose lives I'd touched in ways large and small. Melissa gave the eulogy, talking about resilience and courage and refusing to be a victim. She didn't mention Timothy by name, but everyone knew the story. Everyone understood what she was really saying. Timothy didn't attend. The restraining order extended beyond my death, technically, though I suppose no one would have stopped him if he tried to come. But he stayed away. Respected my final boundary. Let me be buried without his presence contaminating the ceremony. Rebecca told me later, well, she told my grave, during one of her visits, that Timothy had held his own private service. Just him and his wife, in a park where he and I used to take walks when he was little. He'd brought flowers and said goodbye his own way. I guess that's as close to a happy ending as this story gets. My will was read a week after my funeral. Everything went to Rebecca and the kids, just as I'd planned. The house, the savings, what was left of the life insurance policies after I'd spent 20 years living off them. It wasn't as much as Timothy had expected to inherit back when he'd first planned my murder. I'd spent a lot of it living my life, traveling, helping people. But it was enough to make a difference for the people I loved. There was one final provision in the will that surprised everyone. A letter, to be given to Timothy after my death. Rebecca called Melissa and asked what to do with it. Your grandmother's instructions say we have to give it to him, but we don't have to if you don't want to. We could just destroy it. But Melissa insisted they honor my wishes. So she took the letter and drove to Timothy's apartment and handed it to him without a word. He opened it later, alone. This is what it said. Timothy, if you're reading this, I'm dead. Really dead this time, not faking it for survival. And you're still alive, which means you didn't get what you wanted 20 years ago but you got it eventually. Congratulations. You outlived your mother. Was it worth it? The murder attempt, the 18 years in prison, the destroyed relationships, the grandchildren who barely know you, the decades of living with what you did? Did you come out ahead in the end? I hope not. I hope every day of those 18 years was torture. I hope the guilt ate you alive. I hope you spent every moment regretting what you did and understanding that you could never, ever make it right. But I also hope you found some kind of peace. Not for your sake, I don't care about your sake. But for Melissa's sake, and TJ's sake, and for the sake of everyone else who has to live with the aftermath of what you did. I hope you became someone better, even if I'll never believe it. I never forgave you. I want you to know that. I want you to understand that even now, even from beyond the grave, I don't forgive you for trying to kill me. Some things are unforgivable, and attempted murder of your own mother is one of them. But I also want you to know that I moved on. I built a beautiful life after you tried to end it. I was happy. I found meaning and purpose and joy. Your attempt to destroy me only made me stronger. So in the end, you failed. You failed to kill me when you tried, and you failed to define me even after you succeeded in dying first. I'm not the woman whose son tried to kill her. I'm Eleanor Patricia Hoffman, and I lived a damn good life despite you. That's my final message to you. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Not even hatred anymore. Just this: I won. You lost. And that's how this story ends. Goodbye, Timothy. Mom. According to Melissa, he read it 3 times. Then he folded it carefully, put it in a drawer, and never spoke of it again. She asked him once what it said. He just shook his head and said what it needed to say. And that, really, is the end of the story. Not a happy ending, not a sad ending, just an ending. A woman tried to kill by her own son who refused to die, who fought back, who won. A family destroyed and rebuilt into something different. A legacy of survival and strength that outlasted the betrayal that tried to end it. I want to thank you for listening to this whole story, for staying with me through all the pain and rage and revenge, for understanding why I made the choices I made. And I want you to know something important. If you're facing your own impossible situation right now, if someone you trusted has betrayed you, if you're wondering whether you can survive, you can. You're stronger than you think. And survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about choosing to live fully, to fight back, to refuse to be defined by what someone did to you. That's my legacy. That's what I want to leave behind. Not the story of a woman who was betrayed, but the story of a woman who survived. Now, before you go, please check the description box below for more stories like this one. Stories of survival, of strength, of people who refused to be victims. Share this video if it meant something to you. And leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, because knowing you're out there, listening, understanding, makes all of this mean something. Thank you for being part of my journey. Thank you for witnessing my story. And remember, you're stronger than whatever tried to break you. Always.